Welcome everyone. Bonjour à tous. Nous vous remercions d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Thank you for attending today's international virtual event, Canada's Action on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Adaptation. This is part of a series of initiatives under the Global Commission on Adaptation's Nature-Based Solutions Action Track that the Government of Canada is co-leading with Mexico. I'm Jane McDonald, Executive Vice President of the International Institute for Sustainable Development, or IISD for short, and I'll be your facilitator today. IISD is an independent think tank working to create a world where people and the planet thrive. And we're delighted to be co-hosting this event with our colleagues at Environment and Climate Change Canada. Today's event is bilingual. L'événement d'aujourd'hui est bilingue. Vous pouvez choisir d'écouter l'événement dans la langue de votre choix. On the bottom of your screen is a language button. Just look for the globe logo that enables you to listen in French or English if you require translation. Si vous souhaitez avoir accès à la traduction, le bouton qui ressemble à un globe vous permettra d'écouter la conférence en français ou en anglais selon votre choix. Making sure I'm unmuted there. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from my dining room on Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg, where IISD's head office is located. This area is on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Environment and Climate Change Canada's headquarters are in Ottawa, on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. The act of acknowledging the land and the signed treaties where possible is an act of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and the expression of respect and gratitude for the land. This action is to remind us that our places of work, where we live and where we gather are on the traditional lands of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, who historically resided here and continue to do so. It's also a recognition that all of us are accountable to these relationships on a daily basis. Today's event will profile Canada's experience with nature-based solutions for adaptation, discuss successes, challenges, lessons learned, and opportunities to shape Canada's leadership in this area going forward. Adaptation to climate change is a crucial part of the story of how Canada will continue building back better in the face of COVID-19. We have a great opportunity to use nature as a means to strengthen resilience while helping to support the post-COVID economic recovery. Today we'll have 3 exciting panel discussions. First, a high-level panel on Canada's challenges and successes in implementing nature-based solutions for adaptation. Second, a discussion on Indigenous and local leadership in Canada. And our final panel will tackle approaches for financing and scaling up these solutions. Each session will include a variety of short inputs followed by a panel discussion. Because our high-level panel today is quite packed, and to allow time for facilitated discussion, we'll only have time for questions and answers from the audience during sessions 2 and 3. You can submit your question in English or in French in the Q&A box. This event is being recorded and will be made available online on IISD's website later this week. To get us started, I'd now like to introduce Manituk Thompson, Indigenous elder, to provide prayer and blessing. Manituk Thompson is an Inuit knowledge keeper, teacher, and consultant, and the CEO of the Inuit Broadcasting Corporation. She's a former cabinet minister and MLA for Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, and she is also an avid seamstress, known for recycling skins and furs from roadkill animals by turning them into traditional Inuit crafts and clothing. Welcome, Manituk, and over to you.
There's a problem, Jane. I think the video is saying unable to start video. I'm not sure. Sorry.
That's okay. I think we've got you now.
We are. We're on now. Thank you. This is a way to do different business nowadays with COVID. Manitok Thompson yung gama ko yan na mertunga tagvunga ilagi yaw katawama sibula pa mitay kwa no nakakaktuy ko yan na mer pagkatamani no nanginipigi akitawun nakata. First of all, I'd like to thank the First Canadians that are allowing us to be very comfortable and be welcome in their territory to do this. It's a different way of doing business now, and we're adjusted. We have adapted into this. English is not my second language. It's my second language. It's not my language. I learned it in school. So if I mess up, it's because English is not my language. But before I start the prayer and the Kudluk lighting, I just want to say a few things that I've collected with my relatives in Nunavut to talk a little bit about what has changed. I'm not going to take very much of your time, but Inuit wanted to say something, and I'm speaking for them. Very quick little presentation on climate change and what has affected with us, with the women. We bleach our sealskins. We take the fur off the sealskins, and we actually turn the sealskin, one sealskin into, it can have fur, without fur. And when we take the fur off, we can make it white or we can make it black leather. With the white sealskin, we have to bleach it outside. It has to freeze. It has to be frozen to be bleached by the weather. We used to take the sealskin out in March because March was the coldest month of our year. So we would take our sealskin to bleach in March. Now we're not able to, it doesn't freeze anymore. So we've had to adjust that, and we put our sealskins out in January and February. Just a minute, my computer, my laptop. Yeah. So that has changed a bit for the women that are doing sealskins. And I know in 97 or around 97, 98, my father bought a boat, 47-foot boat. He was in his late 70s. He bought a boat from Churchill, Manitoba. He brought it up from Churchill, Manitoba to Coral Harbor, which is about the same distance, I would suppose, from Ottawa to Winnipeg, probably, if you guys know the map. He took his grandkids down, got the boat all ready. It was an old wooden boat, and he traveled up to Coral Harbor. And when he came home, he said, the sun, the planet has shifted. The old traditional markings to going home from out of Coral Harbor in the Hudson's Bay. He said the traditional markings his grandfather used, his forefathers used, have changed. So he said the planet has shifted a bit. My nephews argued with him because they had their GPS and he had his traditional markings to travel. And the nephews kept saying a little bit off here. And he said, no, this is how we've always done it. So I'm following my traditional directions. And with that, they were able to measure how much change on the planet had happened in my father's household. That was a discussion piece when they came back. The other thing that has happened in the Inuit territory is that when we build houses, our houses didn't shift that much, the foundation. We've had to do a lot of renovations to the houses because the ground is shifting, it's melting underneath. the permafrost has melted so much that new houses that are being built have to be adjusted again, and there's lots of cracks in the house during the year from the shifting ground. That's another thing that's a challenge in the Nunavut territory. The other thing that has happened is that my brother wanted to say this to you. He's a road construction contractor. He said that the permafrost used to be about 3 feet, and now it's way, way farther than that now when he's digging the ground. And he thinks that it's, from his observation, it seemed to be melting from underground, the earth. He's older, he's a lot older than me, but that's his observation. He wanted me to say that. There was a beaver found in Baker Lake and caught. Of course, it's probably been made into a myth already, but we don't get beavers in that far territory. We now get them. We have grizzly bears coming all over the place in my region above Winnipeg, that's Kivalliq region. We've never had them in Chesterfield Inlet. That's a small community, Baker Lake. We're having Rankin Inlet. We have so many grizzly bears coming to that territory now. So they're getting caught, and there are brown owls, nesting brown owls that are coming into the territory. There has been a lot of changes with climate change happening in the territory that are visible. We also, I remember my brother going out polar bear hunting on a skidoo. That was in September 9. In the late 70s, he went out polar bear hunting on a skidoo. Today in Coral Harbor, you can't go polar bear hunting on a skidoo in September. There's no snow whatsoever. The snow starts to come in November, October. It used to come in September. And the ships are coming in later. And there's been a lot of changes. I'm going to light my kudluk. This is my kudluk. This is my traditional outfit that you see. It was made out of caribou, but this is imitation of it. It's for carrying a baby. And you see these big balloons here. It's so that when you're traveling on this sled, and it's 60 below, if there's nowhere to feed your baby, this is designed for that, so that your shoulders your elbow can go in the hole, the balloon, grab your baby, slide your baby to the front, and breastfeed your baby without exposing your baby to the weather outside, because the mothers, we were nomads. We didn't really stay in one place. We followed the animals. And so our clothing has been designed for the weather. The little babies would be naked in their mom's pouch in the back, and we were able to service them right inside without ever exposing them to the weather. And that includes caribou skin that they would be sitting on to pee and poo and do their business. If you've ever carried a baby, you would know your baby's temperature every second of the time, and you would know your baby is ready to do his peeing or her pooing or peeing behind you. You don't get messed up because they're sitting on the caribou piece that they just do their business, and then you just take it out and shake it, and then another one, two diapers. This is the kudluk. This is why we survived. This is why Inuit survived. It's our stove. It's a stove. Today we use it to light up all our meetings, to remember where we came from and how much our people endured to survive in the harshest part of Canada. This is a small one. They can go to a very large one, about 1 meter long for a family. This kudlik, as long as you have seal fat, polar bear fat, whale fat, any kind of animal fat, even bacon fat, mazola oil, this will light up. And as long as you have wick, which is which is a moss with Arctic cotton. You have to break it all up. So it's like this, here's Arctic cotton. You break it all up and it's the wick. As long as you have wick and you have fat, this can go on for days. And it can pretty well heat up quite a large room because the stone gets very hot. This is not our ceremonial, this was not our ceremonial tool or whatever. It's our stove for cooking, for heating the igloo. Today, some people misunderstand it as something that is ceremonial. It's our working kudlik. If I turn this a little bit, you'll see my other kudliks there, and there's my teapot on top of a bigger kudlik. And so if I wanted to cook over here, I can easily cook. But I'm going to start this now, and I'm going to say a prayer, and I'll bless your families, because we need to do that with COVID happening. All our houses should be blessed, and I believe in that. I believe that we have a powerful God that can look after us. May your families be blessed, and thank you, Jane, for facilitating this, and you know, and the staff that got a hold of me to start this. It's an honor. And the Dene and the Indigenous people that are on here, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I'm sure there's no Inuit on this conference. I don't know, maybe there are, I'm not aware of. May you have a very good conference and find solutions for climate change. We really need some solution for the North, especially for housing. People are in crowded situations, and it's making COVID worse because there are 15, 16 people in a 3-bedroom house sometimes. In a 2-bedroom house, lots. There's a housing crisis right now in Nunavut for some years, and we're not really getting anywhere with funding for that. There's not enough. Right now we need over 3,000 housing to solve some of the housing crisis in Nunavut. I'm going to pray for them too, because the mothers and the fathers are having a really tough time right now with crowded situation and in lockdown. It's really causing a lot of mental issues in families. Let's pray. Atane koyagi sakpagin tokpagatane ukwakati maniatu say maktikiatane atane sila tunametuni sibigiki. Give them wisdom, Lord, and bless their families around their homes with your Holy Spirit. Oh Lord, heal our families. I rebuke this COVID from our homes. I pray for Nunavut families that are in very serious crisis situation with overcrowdedness, Lord. Help them. Give us wisdom. In the name of Jesus, amen. I'm done now, Jane. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Minitik, for that beautiful blessing, and for your opening thoughts today. I think your memories of the decades of observations from the Inuit people on how climate is changing your livelihoods is probably a perfect way to ground our conversation today. So thank you very much for taking the time today to share your thoughts with us. Next up, the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and one of the 34 commissioners of the Global Commission on Adaptation, will provide his opening remarks for this event by video.
Good morning. As Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change and Canada's Commissioner to the Global Commission on Adaptation, I am delighted to participate in the opening of this event where Canada's experience in implementing nature-based solutions for resilience will be shared. In addition to benefits for building resilience to climate change, nature-based climate solutions also absorb carbon and provide a variety of economic, social, cultural, and health benefits. That potential is what makes this roundtable discussion so important. With almost 1/3 of all land-based carbon storage, including 24% of the world's wetlands, Canada has an important role to play. Canada has committed to conserving 25% of its land and inland waters and 25% of its oceans by 2025, and has further committed to working toward 30% of each by 2030. We have made tremendous progress with regard to protected spaces over the past 5 years. An important part of that progress has been the creation of Indigenous conserved and protected areas, which Indigenous peoples manage in accordance with their governance and knowledge systems. Canada has also created a $2 billion disaster mitigation and adaptation fund, which supports infrastructure projects, including natural infrastructure, that enhance community resilience and enable adaptation to climate impacts. We are also very much focused on using nature-based climate solutions to fight climate change, including a plan to plant 2 billion more trees over the next 10 years and to restore wetlands. There is incredible potential in nature-based solutions, both in terms of climate resilience and in terms of carbon storage. But we need to accelerate uptake of those solutions, unlock and mobilize private sector investment, and encourage new and innovative ways to finance such solutions. It starts here, sharing knowledge, ideas, and experiences. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you. Merci, Minister Wilkinson. As a kickoff to our first session, I'd like to share now with you a short video by Environment and Climate Change Canada, highlighting the need to work with nature to adapt to climate change and build our resilience. It's my great pleasure now to launch our first session, the high-level panel on Canada's challenges and successes in implementing nature-based solutions. Our chair this morning is Christine Hogan, Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada. Prior to her appointment, she served as Executive Director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean at the World Bank Group in Washington. Deputy Minister Hogan, I'll pass it over to you to introduce session one and our panelists.
Great. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Good morning. Thank you very much, Jane, for those words of introduction. And thank you as well to Manitoba Thompson for your perspective this morning, and importantly for your blessing. It bodes well for the discussions ahead for us this morning. Les crises combinées de changement climatique et de COVID-19 ont des répercussions sur les collectivités canadiennes et mettent en lumière les interconnexions entre le climat, la santé des écosystèmes et la santé publique. We must build resilience in our communities and economies, and nature-based solutions can be one of our greatest allies in meeting this challenge. The Government of Canada is strongly committed to advancing nature-based solutions, as illustrated by the recent commitment to plant 2 billion trees and invest in the restoration of degraded ecosystems such as grasslands, forests, and wetlands across Canada. This work, as well as the other initiatives that will be discussed today, is critical in achieving the ambitious domestic commitments to protect 25% of Canada's lands and oceans by 2025. As well as advancing climate change mitigation and adaptation outcomes simultaneously. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to take part this morning in this very exciting event where we have an opportunity to share some of our Canadian experiences with nature-based solutions for climate adaptation with a global audience. Global recognition of the power of nature to help us address climate change has really grown in recent years and in this year as well. A lot of attention has centered on the potential for absorbing more carbon in natural systems. Our goal in the Global Commission on Adaptation has been to underline the benefits of nature-based solutions for adaptation and building resilience to the impacts of climate change. The first panel, the kickoff panel to the session today, is really an opportunity to outline some of the big opportunities as well as the challenges coming out of Canada's experience to date with nature-based solutions for adaptation. I'm really honored and thrilled to have been asked to moderate and help facilitate this session for the next 45 minutes. We have a very distinguished panel. I'll quickly introduce each of them now and then invite them to each take 5 minutes to offer their perspectives and then hopefully facilitate a little bit of an interaction. So our first panelist is His Worship Kennedy Stewart, the Mayor of the City of Vancouver. And Mayor Stewart was elected in October of 2018 and is the city's first independent mayor in 3 decades. Our second panelist is Craig Stewart. Craig is the Vice President of Federal Affairs for the Insurance Bureau of Canada, where he leads national work on disaster resilience and climate change. Our third panelist is Eli Emes. Eli is the president of Isaac Olem Foundation and regional coordinator for North America at the Indigenous Peoples and Community Conserved Areas and Territories Consortium. We also have with us this morning Anna-Lisa Jensen. Anna-Lisa is a counselor for Parkland County, which is west of Edmonton, and she chairs the Environmental Issues and Sustainable Development Standing Committee for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And our final panelist is Dr. Richard Florizone. Richard is the president and the CEO of the International Institute for Sustainable Development, one of the sponsors and hosts of today's event. Thank you all. I hope you've managed to connect. I see everybody's boxes there lined up and we seem to be ready to go. So with those very brief words of introduction and setting the scene, I am going to turn it over to Mayor Stewart to provide your insights on the opportunities of nature-based solutions offered to build resilience to climate change as the Mayor of Canada's third biggest urban center. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just waiting for the host to start my video. There we go. Okay. Morning, everybody, and I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to be part of this panel. Good morning to you. To start off, of course, I'd like to acknowledge we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and thank them for their generosity to all who live on their lands. When it comes to nature-based solutions, there's a lot for cities like Vancouver to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing, intergenerational thinking, and worldwide views that value the interconnectedness of natural systems and communities. And last year, Vancouver joined many cities declaring a climate emergency. We recognize the need to accelerate our efforts to mitigate climate change and adapt our cities to become more resilient and equitable for current and future generations. I'm going to drill down into, since at the municipal level, we're on the ground here, I'm just going to drill down to a specific strategy that we've adopted, which is, I think, speaks nicely to the theme of this conference, and that is our Rain City strategy here in Vancouver. We adopted this in November of last year, and the strategy reframes how we manage rainwater in our city through the use of green rainwater infrastructure and integrated water management approaches. The goal of the strategy, the goals are to protect and improve water quality, enhance our resilience through sustainable water management, and to support healthy ecosystems. Green rainwater infrastructure is an approach to rainwater management that employs both engineering and ecology. So we're, in basic terms, we're modifying our core drainage systems to divert rainwater from our pipe system to reduce combined sewer overflows and stormwater pollution discharge to our local waters. It sounds easy, but it's not. Based on our historic infrastructure here in the city, there was no attention paid to this at all, and it's taken a lot to start to modify our approach. Implementation of nature-based solutions on both public and private property is central to our plans for sequestering carbon and climate adaptation related to water. It supports our water security through water harvest and reuse, and it reduces vulnerability to flooding, sea level rise, urban heat, and drought. Vancouver has implemented a wide variety of green rainwater infrastructure pilots and demonstration projects over the past 20 years, but now we're shifting our energies to move beyond demonstrations to make green rainwater infrastructure mainstream in our policies, plans, and practices. We've adopted a target to capture and clean 90% of the average annual rainfall in Vancouver and have developed 3 action plans to guide implementation of rainwater infrastructure in streets and public spaces, buildings and sites, and parks and beaches. We've set an ambitious implementation target to manage rainwater runoff using green rainwater infrastructure for 40% of impervious areas citywide by 2050. And by impervious, we mean things we've paved over. In the past 2 years since initiating the strategy, we have built 40 new assets in our streets, which clean and divert 32 million liters of rainwater from the pipe system every year, and that's almost 300 projects now in total. Required rainwater management plans that prioritize green rainwater infrastructure for 290 large sites development, created rainwater harvest for reuse permit program that mandates harvested rainwater for toilet flushing, initiated development of a citywide blue-green systems network to integrate intensified water management, transportation, and connectivity. So looking to the future, climate adaptation and the Rain City strategy has been about a paradigm shift that's taken a lot of work on council and a lot of understanding on our behalf. But now we're very excited with this new program moving forward. Transition, though, will take leadership and collective action within cities, but also across disciplines and knowledge areas, as well as across sectors, levels of government, and with the host First Nations here in the city. So we're excited about this and very excited about hearing from the other panelists. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That was very succinct and perfectly kept to the timelines that we have today. So I look forward to engaging in some questions and discussion later in our session. Our next panelist is Craig Stewart from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. And Craig, you have 5 minutes. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning, everyone. I'm speaking to you from Wakefield, Quebec, which is on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Insurance, properly deployed, is about financial resilience. Insurance involves the transfer of risk from the public, so governments, their taxpayers and consumers, to the private capital markets. Through premiums, we send price signals to incent desired behavior and reduce risk. As a form of contract, if you or your community take actions to lower your risk by investing in stormwater upgrades or by flood or fireproofing your home, you, your customers, your taxpayers should be rewarded with lower premiums. We price risk. The lower the risk, the lower everyone pays. Now, as you all know, nature provides significant benefits in protecting communities from risk. When we impair mangroves, coral reefs, wetlands, and sand dunes, we actually impair the resilience of the communities that they protect. If we restore or conserve natural systems, we also restore and increase resilience. So, for example, wetlands in southern Ontario play an important role in reducing flood risk to communities because they efficiently absorb excess water from intense rainfall and from spring runoff from snowmelt. We know these natural assets increase resilience. Our challenge, though, is how to price these assets when nature is often considered a market externality. For this reason, IBC is partnering with Swiss Re and the Canadian Municipal Natural Assets Initiative to scale an innovative approach to nature-based solutions through insurance solutions for nature. We call these nature-based insurance solutions. We have engaged over 20 municipalities across Canada who've expressed interest to us in these solutions. Based on this engagement, we've grouped 3 different types of flood perils and insurance solutions based on agricultural, urban, and coastal contexts. We have then drawn up 3 use cases based on 2 product models: insuring the natural asset itself and ensuring the municipality's public infrastructure, but pricing in the resilience benefits provided by that natural assets. So to give you an example, the city of Drumheller, Alberta faces flood challenges due to agricultural land use practices outside of its administrative boundary. A parametric insurance policy could be designed that would provide rapid payout should the Red Deer River reach a flow rate high enough to damage public infrastructure in the city. Given a contract length of, say, 10 years, the insurer could then price that contract assuming natural storage basins, aka wetlands, are restored upstream of Drumheller. Appropriate premium reductions could be front-end loaded into a trust fund and blended with other contributions used to incent restoration of wetlands on unproductive agricultural lands. A variation of this model could take a watershed approach with a policy entered into with a number of municipalities collaborating through a trust fund, which would then take out a policy, municipalities all aligned along the watershed of the Red Deer River, which would therefore somewhat diversify the risk, lower overall premiums, and allow for wetland restoration and flood mitigation at a larger scale. Or a second solution involves insuring natural assets, such as sand dunes around the Bay of Fundy, building on the work that Danica will describe in the next session. For example, the town of Truro could purchase a parametric policy on a protected natural asset that mitigates the effects of coastal flooding to the community, such as a salt marsh or sand dunes. This product could include coverage for costs of construction work to restore a salt marsh or sand dunes based on either an annual or multi-year policy. The policy could also address additional risks, such as costs associated with community impacts, business interruption, or cleanup. A payout is triggered when a predetermined condition tied to a natural peril is met, such as wave height, water level, or wind speed. This is called a parametric trigger. Once the funds are distributed to the policyholder, for instance, the Truro municipal government, they would directly fund the cost of the emergency response to restore the natural asset. Earlier this autumn, we hosted an online meeting to explain that this approach to interested municipalities. We're now engaged in a dedicated follow-up with the most advanced ones to customize solutions for the context of our municipal partners. Our ambition is to secure memoranda of interest for pilots by this January, with the goal of demonstrating that nature-based insurance solutions can and should be scaled. We see this as an important contribution for nature-based solutions, and we're excited to be scaling this approach in a country that has been dedicated to natural protection. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. Very, this is fun. I've not done a lot of moderating on Zoom before, so lots of buttons to keep track of. But anyway, thank you very much. So it was very, very interesting in terms of some of the work happening across the insurance sector. Our next speaker is Eli Emes from the Isaac Iman Foundation. So I will turn to you, Eli, if we can get your picture up there on the screen. Hi, good morning. Hope you're well.
Good morning.
I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. My name's Eli Emes from the Isaac Olam Foundation. I know that's not an easy organizational name to pronounce. And I'm coming to you from southern Vancouver Island in the Coast Salish territories in the Douglas Treaty lands. And in 2021, next year, we're going to be celebrating 150 years of Confederation with British Columbia and Canada. And I make note of that in particular because it is bound up with the nature-based solution that I want to share with you today. The Douglas Treaties were made by James Douglas, who was, considered to be the first, lieutenant governor of he brought together the colonies of Vancouver Island, New Caledonia, and negotiated terms of union with the Dominion of Canada between, 1867 and 1871. And assured the Coast Salish peoples that they could continue to live their life as they always had, to hunt and fish as formerly. And the elders here have described to me their cultural logic and cultural understanding of those peace and friendship treaties that the right to hunt and fish as formerly is also understood by the peoples as the responsibility to maintain relationship with the environment, with those creatures in the environment. And so that relationship has been interfered with. The ability to exercise those relationships with fish and ungulates and other creatures of the Indigenous economy here in Canada, that relationship has been interfered with over that 150 years. And so we have, the nature-based solution that I want to share with you is called Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, IPCAs. This is a new phenomenon in Canada. It's mustering of effort of Indigenous peoples and government agencies from across the country. Federal, provincial, and territorial governments here in Canada are coming together, recognizing now what the elders have been saying for many years, which is that biodiversity is in a state of crisis in this country. The rapid decline of biodiversity in Canada has gone hand in hand with the decline and elimination of cultures and languages. There are many endangered languages in this country, and those go hand in hand. And David Suzuki said it very well in 2017 that every time an Indigenous language disappears, an entire encyclopedia of information about biodiversity disappears as well. So these Indigenous protected and conserved areas allow for us to look at bio and cultural diversity and the intersectionality between culture and language with biodiversity. So in 2018, the Indigenous Circle of Experts for the Pathway to Canada Target 1 delivered its final report to then Minister of Environment, Catherine McKenna, and the Minister of Environment for Alberta, the co-lead ministers, in ceremony on March 27th, 2018. And since then, we've been First Nations, Indigenous peoples across Canada have been establishing IPCAs, and we feel that it's it brings together terrestrial and marine landscapes through constitutional agency in this country. And I'm talking about these peace and friendship treaties. I'm talking about Section 35 of the Canada Act of 1982. It also brings together biodiversity solutions as well as climate action. And climate action includes mitigation and adaptation strategies together. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, these IPCAs also create the opportunity for resolving these historical injustices and allowing Indigenous peoples to exercise self-determination and collectively good governance for the unborn generations to come. Thank you kindly for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Eli, and apologies on my poor pronunciation of the Isak Olam. Is that better, Isak? Yeah, okay.
Isak Olam, you got it.
Okay, very good. Very, very interesting. And I know there'll be further attention on the issues of Indigenous leadership, which is quite remarkable in Canada around these issues. So again, look forward to digging into some of these issues a little bit more deeply. I'm now going to turn to Councillor Anne-Lisa Jensen, who is joining us from Alberta today to provide some remarks. Hopefully, Councillor Jensen, you're out there in our virtual...
I am. Can you see me?
Yes, I can. Hi, good morning. Nice to see you. Thank you for getting up early today for us.
The sun has just come up, so.
Okay.
Good morning. It's a real honor and privilege to be joining everyone here today. And I'm speaking to you from just outside of Edmonton in Parkland County, which is situated on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. I'd like to speak to you just briefly, introduce you to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is the national voice for Canada's local governments. FCM unites 2,000 municipalities of all sizes, representing more than 90% of Canadians. This gives us unparalleled capacity to convene Canada's local order of government and to help design and implement municipal federal initiatives that build better lives for Canadians. For example, FCM's Big City Mayors Caucus convenes 22 large Canadian cities to drive action on national challenges, while FCM's Rural Forum is a powerful advocate for rural communities and provides local governments in rural areas with greater access to FCM and federal decision makers. As well, for more than 30 years, FCM has partnered with the Government of Canada to deliver national and international programs, such as the Green Municipal Fund and the Municipal Climate Innovation Program. These programs are building municipal capacity on everything from climate resilience and asset management to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And as a result, we're driving local solutions to national challenges. One of the biggest challenges of our time is climate change, and municipalities have a significant role to play as we come together to address this challenge. Natural infrastructure such as trees, vegetation, wetlands, and shorelines play a critical role in climate change mitigation and adaptation by sequestering carbon, combating the heat island effect, cooling buildings and public spaces, reducing shoreline erosion, restoring wetland and riparian areas, and reducing flooding risks. Municipalities of all sizes are increasingly turning to natural infrastructure, parks and protected areas for sustainable service delivery, and to improve overall community resilience, but also to improve residents' access to nature and support biodiversity. During this current pandemic, residents have become increasingly aware of the need to access natural areas, particularly urban parks, to maintain mental and physical health and well-being, clearly demonstrating the co-benefits of natural infrastructure that are often difficult to measure and value. FCM's experience in implementing the Municipal Climate Innovation Program, which is MCIP, demonstrates that many municipalities, especially smaller ones, struggle to act on these issues because of a lack of data and a lack of human and financial resources. To address this gap, MCIP and our Municipal Asset Management Program have supported more than 1,370 municipalities across Canada, implementing climate innovation solutions since their inception 4 years ago. And one example of a funded capital project for natural infrastructure is in 2018, MSIP approved a $750,000 grant for a capital project for the city of Laval to reduce the effects of urban heat islands, which represent 13% or over 3,200 hectares of its territory. And the project consists of implementing demineralization interventions over an area of 3,000 square meters and planting 7,200 plants, mostly trees, on public and private land by an organization recognized in the field in collaboration with Laval property owners. The project will make it possible to quantify the environmental benefits associated with demineralization and greening interventions in terms of adaptability to climate change. Another example of a funded planning project is in 2018, MSIP approved a $96,000 grant for the development of an urban forest management plan for the town of Collingwood. The plan aims to reduce the impact of stormwater on the town's drainage infrastructure caused by excessive water runoff, flooding, and erosion that is occurring due to climate change by reviewing the current urban forest and seeking recommendations to increase green infrastructure to reduce the amount of runoff entering sewers during rain events. But more needs to be done, and municipalities are ready to do more. As Canada turns to economic recovery, it will be important to support municipalities in strengthening community resilience by, one, providing more funding to local adaptation projects and capacity building, and optimizing that support for communities of all sizes across Canada. And also by enabling municipalities to do more with federal funding by supporting the acquisition of land for parks, protected areas, and natural infrastructure. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and great to have you with us this morning and to hear specifically about activities across Canada at the municipal level. Our last panelist this morning, our final panelist, is Dr. Richard Florizone from IISD. And I'll turn it over to you, Richard, to offer your perspective.
Thanks, Christine, and thanks to all the panelists for taking part. It's great to be here today. I'm with you from Waterloo, Ontario, Ontario, which is also the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Christine, isn't it a big question, right, that we're addressing? How can nature-based solutions address climate change, biodiversity loss, COVID recovery, right? It's such a long list and it sounds overly idealistic. But I want to make the case for you in 4 minutes here that that is absolutely not a stretch. And it's one of the reasons why there's an emerging consensus among some of the top economic and financial leaders in the world and experts that nature investments in natural infrastructure are among the top five initiatives for pandemic recovery. But let me start at home. An example I want to talk to you about, a project that ISD was involved in, was called Pelle's Lake. You can look it up, P-E-L-L-Y. What Pelle's Lake is a natural wetland that's about 50 kilometers southwest of Winnipeg. And ISD and other partners came together to develop an engineered floodwater retention project there that opened in about 2015. And it's got a lot of benefits that speak to the topic of this panel. Of course, managing flood, which is great. Of course, habitat protection, because it's extending wetlands. It's a great carbon sink. It also, because of the cattails that are there, it takes up about 5,000 kilograms of phosphorus every year, right? And we know that phosphorus leads to algal blooms and impacts our waterways. So it sounds pretty good. And by the way, the local community, the farmers said, wow, the quote is, we got this without giving anything up. I mean, the water's there a bit longer in the spring, but actually the grass is greener and there's more hay. So it looks like a great win, right? Just based on the environmental benefits. But here's the kicker, is economically, right? Economically, this project like this is just a no-brainer. So the costs of Pelle's Lake are about just under $200,000 a year to operate and maintain this engineered retention project. But by the way, in that 200,000, about 100,000 of it is offset from sales of the cattails that go into bioenergy. Okay, so it's about 100,000 a year. Well, our modeling shows that the ecosystem benefits of that total $60 million. Right? So that's the benefits in terms of the nutrient removal, the phosphorus removal, the carbon sequestration, and the flood protection. 60 million in benefits for 100,000 a year. And by the way, if this natural ecosystem didn't exist and we weren't managing it properly, we estimate it would cost $37 million to create. So there you go. Even if you aren't convinced of the economic or even if you aren't convinced of the climate or biodiversity benefits, you can see the economic impact here. Now I want to tie back to Canada and the global picture. I had the pleasure earlier this year, and Craig, who's part of this panel, was part of it, to chair the Task Force for Resilient Recovery. That was an independent group of experts advising how Canada should respond in the post-pandemic recovery. And basically, our point of view is that we should really give up on this kind of false compromise between the economy and environment, that there's an emerging global consensus of a set of initiatives that governments can undertake that are good for the economy and good for the environment. And guess what? Just as I said to you earlier, there was a team of economists led by Nobel laureate Joe Stiglitz at Oxford that polled 200 finance experts, economic experts around the world to look at the best interventions governments could make to have a good economic multiplier, right? Get those jobs back, but also be good for the environment. And among the top five was investments in this nature-based infrastructure, investments in natural infrastructure. So, you know, we have the expertise. We've been able to show it here in Canada. We have the evidence abroad. This just looks like an area that we need to pursue. I want to say something briefly. I'm not sure if I've got my 1 minute warning yet, but just about international is that, you know, IISD, we run something called the NAP Global Network, National Adaptation Planning Global Network. That's got over 120 countries that are working to advance, and we're doing the peer-to-peer learning and trying to share the knowledge with them to advance adaptation plans and investments in natural infrastructure, including 42 countries that we're directly advising. And I can speak to lots of examples of that, but basically it's through networks like that and peer-to-peer learning that we can expand this, not just here in Canada, but abroad, bringing the best of Canada to the world, but also bringing that international knowledge home to advance nature-based infrastructure and climate adaptation here in Canada to address all those issues, including the ones that our elder Manitok spoke to so eloquently at the outset. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Richard. So now we can dig into a few of these issues, and maybe picking up with the theme that you left us with, Richard, about the business case for natural infrastructure. I'd be very curious, Mayor, if you wouldn't mind commenting, and I see in our little chat a couple of people have raised this question. The Rain City strategy is very exciting. It's something I think that to the point of this symposium, the world will be watching, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of invitations to share your lessons. How have you managed to engage private sector players in the opportunities that can come from something like the Rain City strategy and build that consortium of partners that Richard talked about? We've got the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the financial sector in Canada is paying close attention to these issues, we know. I'm just curious how you approach that, what your experience has been, and maybe a lesson or two, and then I'll see if other panelists want to comment on a similar vein to that point.
Thanks so much for this question and really interesting information from the rest of the panelists. So really this is started with my predecessor, Gregor Robertson, and his council, who for 10 years really drove the Greenest City agenda here at the city. And what it did is it attracted, I would say, investments from around the world in things. For example, we've just approved the world's largest passive house. And once what that's been doing is developing our cluster of folks who want to innovate in this area, and that in turn informs the public, and it almost snowballs in effect that it becomes part of the culture here. When you weave in, of course, we're on unceded territories, so when you weave in the innovations that are brought forward by the three host nations here in Vancouver, it really has a pretty amazing impact on the city. And of course, to be crass, that translates into votes. So I think what happens as elections roll along, that this is what the public wants to see in their elected officials, is a commitment to these types of policies. So it allows us to change our building codes. It allows us to, change our other policies in the city that done in conjunction though with the private sector. So it's always negotiated, and we like to try new things. So I think that's it, is just to start to develop your cluster by taking some early risks, and then just keep feeding that energy that's generated from those early starts. So thanks to Mayor Robertson for kicking that off, and of course previous mayors have done that as well. But we're happy to continue here in our term.
Great. Did anybody else want to just come in on that point? I don't know, Craig, sort of coming from that private sector perspective, when you see the movement of municipalities in this direction, how does that help spur the thinking of your sector along?
So, we've been engaged actually more generally with municipalities across the country in a bit of a national dialogue around, if you are going to invest in resilience, no matter what that investment is. So even, traditional gray infrastructure, if you're going to be upgrading your stormwater systems, what sort of benefit do you and your constituents get in terms of insurance rates? So that's a very active dialogue. Part of the issue is a data problem. We don't pick up necessarily all those stormwater upgrades, for instance, or improvements that de-risk communities. We have no way of knowing. There's no one central database of those things. But another issue, which is more salient here, is that it's very difficult to price climate risk mitigation. Whether we're improving stormwater drainage, or whether you're introducing wetlands or rainwater diversion facilities, through green solutions, we're challenged to properly price that resilience value. And so we can't do it for gray infrastructure. It's even more difficult to do it for natural solutions. And so what we need to do, and this is a collective problem that we are actively trying to solve, is to figure out how to make resilience investments pay, how to quantify and distribute that return on investment that Richard talked about in his presentation, and how to quantify that, turn that into a return, figure out how to quantify it to reduce insurance premiums, but also how to quantify it to attract private capital. And whether we're in Canada or the UK or Mexico, it's the same challenge. If we crack that nut, we can be a lot more innovative with attracting private capital to nature-based solutions for adaptation.
Great. Eli, maybe I can turn to you and just see if you might want to offer, because we do have a global audience here today, what sort of your experiences in terms of advancing Indigenous leadership. It is such a critical piece of the puzzle in Canada when it comes to nature-based solutions. And I'm wondering what if you had one or two lessons or experiences that you would want to share with the international community, what you might point to.
Sure thing. So I would point to Clayoquot Sound on the west coast of Vancouver Island. People might have heard about Tofino. Clayoquot Sound has been an international destination for 300 years, going back to the fur trade. And in recent years, starting in 1984, the Clayoquot Nation, with the support of non-Indigenous peoples from across Canada and the United States, declared the Mears Island Tribal Park. And that Mears Island Tribal Park declaration protected a huge ancient cedar rainforest on Mears Island, which was slated for logging. So a major carbon sink was kept at that time. Those trees are still standing today, and that the biological diversity in this ancient ecosystem is a natural heritage gift for the rest of the world, really. And Since 1984, the region of Clayoquot Sound has also become a biosphere reserve, a UNESCO biosphere reserve, which ties in with the global community through the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. This innovation has led to, I believe, one of the most forward-thinking actions of the Canadian government, and this was 15 years ago. They returned land back to our nation, Clayoquot, from the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. And what we did with that approximately 86 hectares of land was we built one of the most sustainable Indigenous communities in Canada. We used innovative rainwater, stormwater management infrastructure, using biomimicry and looking at how the sphagnum moss bog in that ecosystem would naturally hold rainwater and let it out slowly, gradually over time. We built a geothermal system to offset the need for electricity and home heating technologies, and so on and so forth. But the real story here is that that land was returned to the nation, and we did something really, I think, quite innovative with that. And it's all in those tribal parks and those biosphere reserves have really inspired what Indigenous protected and conserved areas have become. And the point that I would want to end on is to make a acknowledgement of the tribal parks allies. And these are individuals, private sector companies, civil society organizations in Clayoquot Sound that are coming together to support the tribal park, not just morally, but through recognizing the ecosystem services that our tribal parks provide. For example, Mears Island is the water source for the municipality of Tofino. We protected that water source when the province of British Columbia 36 years ago saw fit to clear-cut log that island. Their own municipality was depending on for water supply, and those natural assets, those ancient cedar rainforests, also are the major draw for Tofino's tourism economy. And so we're building on this ecosystem service fee program, ecosystem service contribution program, where businesses are collecting a small amount of money with every financial transaction that they have. And it's voluntary, by the way, so that's important. And they're passing that money along to the tribal park so that we can run and continue to maintain our operations. And I'd love to talk with the mayor of Vancouver about expanding this ecosystem service program and how you can engage with Indigenous peoples and continue to build on the great acknowledgements that Vancouver has been making and other municipalities across this country. So this is, I think, bringing together all of those various streams. And yeah, thanks for giving me the oxygen here, Christine, to plug that.
If I can just add, we are starting to return land as well to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and that is, another step in reconciliation. And I got married in Tofino, so
oh, wow.
Love it up there.
Nice.
Well, I fear that I'm supposed to be the clock watcher as well as the facilitator here, and I know our time is really winding down. But I'd love to hear one more time, at least from Councillor Jensen and maybe from Richard before we close off, about sort of the Canadian experience and what we can bring to the table. And I think one of the big challenges that we're all focused on right now is how do we accelerate this work. I think many of you have mentioned that COVID-19 has really shined a light on some of these issues. Resilience, the notion of building back better is very much on our minds. But do you have thoughts on how, particularly for the participants in this conference, how we should look at accelerating our efforts in the coming months and years, given the magnitude of the challenge, but also I think some of the business opportunities that a couple of you have spoken to, and the need for deepened partnerships. I liked Eli's word, allies, in the nature-based adaptation space. So maybe I can turn to Councillor Jensen and then to Richard, and then I fear we're going to have to close off to give the other panels their time today.
Yeah, you bet. Time always goes too quickly. So I could speak about two things really quickly, and certainly through FCM's work, we see the importance of strong partnerships and how those play such a critical role in accelerating the implementation of nature-based solutions for adaptation. So through our organization, certainly there's numerous partnerships, especially with the federal government, that allows us to provide capacity building, training, knowledge projects, products, impactful funding approaches to municipalities across Canada. And in terms of accelerating this work, I think when people see elected officials and people see more and more that when we invest in these nature-based solutions, we not only get the same or better service delivery in terms of things like stormwater management, flood protection, water quality protection, we also get climate change mitigation benefits like the heat island reduction, the energy efficiency, and we have increased health and wellness for our residents. We'll all better understand the true value of these natural assets, which are just so important. And of course, we still need better methods in place for putting this value to paper, as Craig has spoken about, and it's good to see you again, Craig. We've shared a panel before, so we can integrate it fully into our decision-making processes. But when we more clearly see why it's important, we'll put more effort into making it happen. Thanks.
Great.
Well,
Richard.
that's Annalise. I think Annalise has taken a good half of what I was going to say. So let me be brief. Look, in our work at IISD in nature-based solutions, both in Canada and internationally, we really see an opportunity to kind of bridge this conversation and accelerate a global movement around nature-based solutions. We're focused on two things. One is replicating and building this evidence base. So I mentioned the Pelle's Lake analysis. We did that with something called our tool called Savvy that we're using that internationally. We've got a new project with the Global Environmental Facility, or GEF, to kind of expand that with some other foundations. And so we need that evidence base, right, to kind of show investors and show the public what can be done here. And the second is really Annalise's point, and it's represented by this panel, which is we need to leverage existing platforms and networks, right? So I've already spoken about the 100+ countries we're working with that we want to expand on. But let me just bring it home to the 6 folks of us who are on this panel. The climate problem, and therefore accelerating nature-based solutions. The whole climate problem is a tragedy of the commons, right? It's individuals or individual countries or organizations, acting in their own self-interest that then is depleting our common resources. So the only way around that is to turn it around. And you see that through examples like Pelle's Lake, that the benefits are distributed. So the solutions are only going to come in partnership, right? And so, and you see it from this panel. From Mayor Stewart or Annalise at FCM, municipalities are on the front lines of this, right? So they're the ones that are it's right in their face. Eli spoke about Indigenous protected areas, which again was a major piece of our proposals because we've seen the effectiveness of that. And across Canada, you can look at the incredible stories of Indigenous efforts in clean energy, for example, that are not just terrific in terms of the environment, but in terms of reconciliation and economic development. And then Craig, from the insurance industry and private sector side, you're seeing that climate now is not just an environmental issue, it's a balance sheet, an economic issue with the real insurance. So my point is you by definition have to create those partnerships, I think, to capture the value and move this forward. So Christine, I'll only end by saying the ball, I think, is in your and my court, because I think government and think tanks have a role to play, and organizations like FCM and all of us really to kind of bring this together and capture what are very considerable benefits for Canada, for our environment, and for our economy and for jobs. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Those are really good points, Richard. And I think you have a partner in Environment and Climate Change Canada, and we're happy to be demonstrating that by our joint partnership in this session today. One of the issues that I saw in the chat room that we didn't get to was scale. So hopefully there'll be chances later in the discussion for other panelists and other Q&A sessions to get at the issue of how do we bring some of these very interesting ideas and initiatives that are happening, and scale them up. I think that's a really interesting challenge that we're all faced with. Let me just invite Jane back in to tell me that we're finished on our time. But I want to thank very sincerely, especially Mayor Stewart for getting up so early, and Councillor Jensen as well for joining us, Richard, Eli, and Craig. Really interesting insights this morning, and it was really a great pleasure for me to have a chance to meet some of you and listen to the discussion. And I turn it back over to you, Jane.
Great. Thank you so much, Deputy Minister, and all the panelists. It was a great session. I want to give a shout out also to all the people who are participating and listening around the world here today, because we got some fantastic questions from you all coming in. And so I know we didn't have time to dive into a lot of them during this session, but we'll do our best to follow up and connect you to the relevant panelists where you had sort of in-depth specific questions for them. So please keep those great questions coming. We're going to take a short break while we get our next set of panelists ready to go. And while we do that, I would love to hear more from our audience. And so we have a short audience poll now that I would invite you all to participate in. And it's you can see up here how to get involved. You've got to go to menti.com, and there's a code up on your screen to enter so that you can participate in this poll. The question is, in one word, what do you think is the challenge to mainstream nature-based solutions for adaptation into local planning processes? So really interesting to see. We'll build a word cloud out of your answers, but love to see what you all think in one word the main challenge is to mainstream these actions. Thank you so much. Just a reminder that the website and the code are at the top of this slide that you can see. I think I already see capacity and education coming through very strongly, and funding some of the issues that we touched on here today. Collaboration also coming through as a big one for us, something that I think we all recognize, and it's great to see coming through from an international audience as well. Not surprising, perhaps. And our biggest one that's sticking out in the middle here is funding. And I think that speaks to the challenges that we talked about earlier on this, and that we'll dive into when we get to our third session again on scaling up and providing funding for these. It has to do with valuation, I think, and all kinds of issues. Thank you all for participating. This is fantastic. I see proof of concept, communication, opportunity, listening. But the big ones, I think, are pretty constant. So it's a real call to action for us to kind of keep moving around, making sure that we are showing the evidence, building capacity, and as we all are, collaborating and trying to find new ways of accessing funding for these great solutions. Cool. Thank you all. Looks like we settled in there to the big ones. And I love how they tied so closely. We're now going to go to a quick video to launch our second session, developed by IISD, just to showcase action on local nature-based solutions across Canada. So I'll flip it over to the video next, and then we'll start our second session.
We need to build back better. Let's do it naturally. As governments across the world grapple with how to recover from a global pandemic amidst a changing climate, we must not forget the critical role of nature. Nature-based solutions are natural or naturalized systems managed by humans to provide specific benefits such as cleaner water or flood protection. For example, floating wetlands are man-made structures using living grasses that pull up contaminants from water. What's exciting about these nature-based solutions is that they provide cost-effective ways to meet today's needs while providing long-term environmental and economic resilience. What's needed is for governments to provide funds specific to these natural infrastructure needs, for local governments and planning departments to make these natural infrastructure solutions commonplace, and for practitioners and researchers to continue to spread ways in which these solutions can be adopted. We need to build back better. Let's do it naturally.
Fantastic. On to our second session, Indigenous and local leadership in Canada. This session will be chaired by Niall O'Day, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of the Canadian Wildlife Service. Dr. O'Day began his Government of Canada career working with Environment Canada on climate and technology policy, and has also served in the Privy Council office, advising on matters for ministers of fisheries and oceans, natural resources, and environment. I'm going to pass it over to you, Niall, to introduce our second session and all of our great panelists. Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Great to be here today. Bonjour et bienvenue à toutes et à tous à la deuxième session de l'événement virtuel aujourd'hui. My name is Niall O'Day, as Jane has mentioned. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Canadian Wildlife Service at Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'd like to begin by acknowledging, like many others, that I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, which is on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabeg Nation, and very grateful to be here. This session will be a panel discussion on Indigenous and local leadership in Canada. And you've heard a lot about that from Eli already. And as Deputy Christine Hogan mentioned, this is an opportunity to dive deeper. It will showcase the leadership efforts and actions taken by Indigenous and local communities in implementing nature-based solutions across Canada to benefit the well-being, mitigate the impacts of extreme weather events, and generate sustainable development opportunities. Indigenous peoples and their ancestors have long been stewards and managers of their traditional lands and waters and ice, and leaders in ecosystem conservation in Canada. The unique perspectives, knowledge, rights, and responsibilities of Indigenous peoples can inspire others and improve conservation outcomes. Nature-based solutions are inherently place-based. Local communities have a vital role to play in choosing how to develop their lands for sustainability and for resilience. Aujourd'hui, nous entendrons des exemples inspirants et des leçons apprises de la part des dirigeants et de diverses communautés canadiennes, y compris de la part des détenteurs et détentrices de droits acquis. After hearing from our panelists, we will have 15 minutes for questions. Donc, après avoir écouté nos panélistes, nous disposerons de 15 minutes pour les questions et les commentaires. I invite the audience to submit questions through the Zoom Q&A, as you have been doing enthusiastically, and we will ask a selection of your questions to the panelists at the end of the session. It's my honor to introduce to you the panelists for this session. J'ai maintenant l'honneur de vous présenter les panélistes de cette session. I'd kindly remind all of our panelists to limit their interventions to 5 minutes to help us keep to our time. Our first panelist for this session is Stephen Netaw, a former member of the Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly and former chief of Lutzelk'e Dene First Nations. Currently, Mr. Netaw is the Northwest Territories advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative. Our second panelist will be Dr. Danica Van Pruisi, Chair of Geography at St. Mary's University and Fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. Dr. Van Prusdi will be presenting on the implementation of managed realignment for salt marsh restoration and climate adaptation. Our third panelist is Sarah Hansen, Regional Director for North America for Youth for Nature, a youth-led, youth-driven nonprofit organization that empowers young people to lead on nature and climate action. And our fourth panelist is Melina Schulefield, Manager of the Green Infrastructure and Rain City Strategy for the City of Vancouver. Ms. Schulefield will be presenting on adapting to precipitation changes with nature-based solutions. I'd like to sincerely thank all our panelists for joining us today, and we look forward to their presentations, after which we'll have that short period of questions. Mr. Nita, I'd now like to turn to you to begin our session by telling us about the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and how it supports implementing nature-based solutions in communities.
Merci, now, Stephen Nita Sullier, c'est une activité saisida sa exposure. Merci, Nathan. Good morning, my name is Stephen Nita. My Dene name is Satslu, which means fun rope. I am thankful to our creator. My community, my people, we call the creator Nuhtsine. Nuhtsine, Nu is the island that is Mother Earth. Just acknowledging that speaks to the immense knowledge systems that Indigenous people have, recognizing the Earth as an island as part of our creation stories is a huge understanding of the terrestrial environment with which Mother Earth exists. This morning, I read an article about the 16th Chapel of the Ancients, a 13-kilometer long rock art in the Colombian Amazon, dating back 12,600 years. So we do have, this is before the Ice Age. So as Indigenous people, we do have some corporate knowledge around relationships with our environment and the changing aspects of it. In Canada, we certainly have a great deal of responsibility. We have a huge quantum of land and ocean that requires management for the benefit of all mankind on Earth. And I think Indigenous people are certainly taking the lead. As you look at the map here, these are all Indigenous-led initiatives to create Indigenous protected and conserved areas. You're talking about scale. Altogether, we're looking at about 500,000 square kilometers of land to be protected under Indigenous leadership. The opportunity is great. The challenges is great. As you see, a lot of the dots are north of the 50th parallel, 55th parallel. These are the regions of the country that is economically depressed and socially, I guess you could say, for social justice. These are the hardest places to reach economically and with other resources. But these dots represent huge quantum of land that Indigenous nations know a great deal about, that have intimate relationship with, and can manage in collaboration with Western science to help us transition through these changing climates. The challenge here is economics, but the opportunity for economic is within those lands. We're talking trillions and trillions of metric tons of carbon sink. There's financial value in that carbon sink, and that's been one of the problems in the Americas, as far as from my perspective. The Americas and all those places that were colonized throughout the world, the colonizers' views of those places were these lands and waters don't have value until we dig it up and find financial value in it. Today, we know that these territories have immense value that benefit all life on Earth. And Canada plays a big part of it. There's a reason why globally Where there's only 25% biodiversity left on Earth, 80% of that is on Indigenous people's lands. So there's a great deal that I think the global population can learn from Indigenous worldviews and a respect for our natural environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Really meaningful remarks, and look forward to our discussion at the end. I'll now turn to Dr. Danica van Persie to provide insights on the salt marsh restoration and climate change adaptation work that she has been engaged in.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say that I'm speaking to you from my home just outside of Halifax, which is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Foreshore salt marshes and the dikes that they protect, they form the first line of defense for low-lying communities in many areas to the effect of climate change. Storm surge and flooding pose significant risks to lives, livelihoods, and infrastructure. A repeat of the 1869 Saxby Gale, which flooded the Chignecto Isthmus, which is a narrow stretch of land between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, if repeated today, would result in approximately $50 million loss of trade per day. Next slide, please. Occupying former salt marsh habitat, low-lying communities in the Bay of Fundy are protected by 364 kilometers of dikes and associated infrastructure. While the Bay of Fundy does have the highest tides in the world, the dikeland communities within it share similar vulnerabilities to flooding, storm surge, and erosion with dike communities across the world due to subsidence, one-way gate structures that do not allow heavy rainfall discharge when the tide is high, shifting land use practices, and increasing protection on dike infrastructure and maintenance. Globally, the practice of reintroducing, where feasible, tidal flow to former agricultural dikelands and restoring tidal wetlands through managed realignment has been identified as a viable adaptation option to current and future hazards to climate change. Next slide. Over the last 2 decades, St. Mary's University has been collaborating with CB Wetlands environmental specialists with support of provincial departments of agriculture and Department of Transportation and Infrastructure renewal to restore 440 hectares of tidal wetland habitat at 17 different sites across Nova Scotia. We apply our comprehensive scientific understanding of self-engineering capacities of tidal wetlands built over years of research and application to design, model, implement, and monitor these projects. Next slide. In response to the call of the federal government to develop innovative solutions to help Canadians adapt to climate change impacts while also enhancing and protecting coastal ecosystems, we teamed up with colleagues at social science colleagues at Dalhousie University and others to promote 2 interwoven projects, Making Room for Wetlands and Making Room for Movement. Together, we are building a framework for implementing nature-based solutions and actually demonstrating on the ground their success. Next slide. The Belcher Street Managed Realignment in Jijjiwuktuk is one of the 2 Making Room for Wetlands projects that has currently been implemented. This involved dike realignment, restoration of 6.5 hectares of tidal wetland habitat, and implementation of a novel root water erosion protection method. Next slide. 2 years later, the site has experienced a diversity of tidal wetland services, habitat use, and the root wad bank stabilization method is succeeding after some adaptive management. Next slide. The comprehensive monitoring at this site and others, and unique collaborations within the Center of Expertise at Transcoastal Adaptations have provided opportunities for living laboratories and an increased network of researchers, such as the NSERC ResNet project led by Elena Bennett at McGill, of which many of our quite a few local researchers at St. Mary's, Dal, Acadia, and Santa Vex are a part of, for studying all of the amazing co-benefits and actually quantifying some of these benefits that nature-based adaptation options provide and trade-offs that must be considered. Next slide. Sometimes a picture says 1,000 words. Through the restoration process, this is at Converse, pretty much 9 months after the first breach, we are documenting the recovery and the restoration trajectory through photos, drone imagery, and video, and data visualization to help develop case studies for public, private, NGO, and academic communities. Next slide. Long-term collaboration, trust, and growing scientific evidence of the effectiveness of managed realignment and tidal wetland restoration in the region has led to a fundamental shift in how the dikeland systems are managed for the future. Through internal knowledge and growing scientific evidence and subject matter experts, NSD has developed a suite of 7 dikeland system potential design upgrade options, which include managed realignment and tidal wetland restoration alongside of dike reinforcement, aboiteau upgrades, and drainage improvements. With support of guidance documents and a decision support tool, design options can be determined through various technical analyses, stakeholder engagement, and Mi'kmaq consultation. This is an innovative, it is novel to the region, and it also showcases a new way of thinking in dikeland management and landscape management as a whole. Collaboration, innovation, long-term monitoring, trust, and a reimagining of our coastal landscapes are key to successful implementation of nature-based climate change adaptation options. Thank you.
Thank you, Danica, for sharing that exciting work and some great images. Next, we have Sarah Hansen to present on behalf of Youth for Nature on creating safe spaces for Indigenous youth. Sarah?
Hi, hello. Like Niall introduced, I'm Sarah Hansen, and I am from Bictigan. I'm an Anishinaabe youth for Bictigan Anishinaabe. You'll see on the map below an estimate of where I come from. On the northwestern Ontario, Lake Superior side, and but today I'm situated on the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe lands, currently known as Ottawa. I've been working in the climate space formally going on 2 years, initially getting my start with Youth Climate Lab in early 2019. Since then, I've grown my network and now work with organizations like Leading Change Canada, Experiences Canada, the Ontario Council for International Cooperation, and what I'm here today to speak on behalf of Youth for Nature. Next slide, please. So at Youth for Nature, we got our start last year providing a youth perspective on nature-based solutions. But now when I discuss nature-based solutions, I relate it back to my upbringing, as many other Indigenous panelists here have today. Growing up, I was on the land most of my life. I went camping, I went to powwows, and I went berry picking. Then when I moved to Ottawa in 2013 and then to Kingston in 2015 for my undergrad, I became severely disconnected to the land. It was only through sharing my indigeneity in later years of my degree and having the opportunities I have since leaving that institution have I become fully aware of the unique perspective Indigenous people globally hold to combating climate change. The stories I've heard throughout my years from family and friends have become clear, as I've also heard similar stories from my travels visiting Indigenous people in El Salvador and Guyana. Then through these past 2 years working with organizations and the government, actually, I was able to learn more about the amazing innovations Indigenous people have thought of to adapt, mitigate, and become resilient to climate change. We'll have heard some of these this morning already from Eli Emes and my fellow panelists right now, but these are only the tip of the iceberg. Globally, Indigenous people lead on nature-based solutions because it is integral to their well-being. That's why I've included the medicine wheel here. And not only because of the connections Indigenous people have to the land and how nature-based solutions are actually a part of Indigenous ways of living, but also because these are not unfamiliar within the youth movement. Next slide, please. Youth for Nature is a leading youth-led group working at this nature and climate nexus. We utilize knowledge sharing, storytelling, capacity building to advocate for ecosystem and justice-based approaches to the climate crisis. Earlier into my term as a North American Regional Director, as I was doing my initial research into who I would be working with, I looked through the stories within our 2019-2020 storytelling campaign. Within those stories, I found that the actions youth around the world are doing is mainly due to the relationship to the land and the loss they have seen because of the climate crisis. For example, Plant a Tree, Plant a Future was created by 2 youth in British Columbia who grew up in the wilderness and simply wanted to ensure it was there for more than a few years that it was currently being approximated. More stories like this are available on our website storytelling page, with new stories actually being welcomed from youth globally. Next slide, please. Now to end, why do I choose to work with a non-Indigenous organization? Indigenous youth today are increasingly becoming more vocal in changing the systems we live in. Across Canada, many of those at the front lines of conflicts of our treaty rights are youth. Many also speak up against the injustices we face, like my friend Hannah Martin and the recent Mi'kmaq fisheries crisis. And these are all nature-based solutions because they affect how our world is going to continue. And these individuals are also connecting to learn what is and isn't acceptable, especially within the pandemic this past year. We've been able to utilize the world we grew up in, aka during the technological era, to connect our stories and movements. For me, this led to going global with engaging youth from all over to discuss how nature-based solutions can be a pathway for adapting to the climate crisis. These individuals I work with are some of the most understanding and open people who all understand that Indigenous people are leaders in this field, and integrating their knowledge into solutions only makes us better. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Great presentation. Look forward to the discussion. I'll turn next to Melina Schullefield to end our panel discussion with your remarks on adapting to precipitation changes. So Melina, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm speaking here from the Vancouver area, which is the traditional and unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm very grateful for their leadership in this sphere around environmental protection and natural nature-based solutions. Very inspired by it. So happy to share with you what we are endeavoring to do here in Vancouver. And this is actually a beautiful picture of an engineered wetland in the heart of Vancouver. You can see our downtown just behind, that is actually managing 2/3 of the stormwater from the Olympic Village neighborhood, which has about 3,000 people. So it's just one example of what we're trying to do here. Okay, moving on to the context for Vancouver next. So for those of you who don't know, Vancouver is on the west coast of Canada. And next. And we're just one municipality of 23 in a broader metropolitan region. So we are the largest city and our population is just over 600,000. And we are surrounded by water, and we also are well known for our rain in Vancouver. So we get about 1,400 millimeters per year. And because we're surrounded by water, we tend to be a fairly compact city. We don't have a lot of urban sprawl in our community, and we're fairly developed. So for us thinking about nature-based solutions, we're really looking at how do we start to bring nature back into the city where we've really disrupted a lot of those natural systems and processes. Next. So the Rain City strategy for Vancouver started actually as a regulatory obligation to address water quality issues related to sewer and drainage systems. But as we endeavored to look at, how would we address that as a city, I think it became very, very apparent that there were actually many imperatives to change how we're doing business and to think about how we prepare and adapt for the future. Next. I know this group thinking about climate adaptation is going to be really familiar with these types of issues. But when we think about climate change, we recognize that a lot of people, how they're going to be experiencing it first is actually in terms of too much and too little water. So this is actually our engineering department in behind. This was just a little event that we had a huge rainfall in a very short amount of time. And you can imagine when you've got a city of concrete, glass, asphalt, where does the water go? So for us, it's really about starting to restore natural pathways and managing water in a different way. Next. So Rain City strategy was often a surprise to people that we cared as much about managing lots of water as we cared about managing the times when there's too little water. And so thinking about urban heat and drought are actually increasingly important for cities, not only from a public health perspective, but for our natural systems. You can see many of our street trees are actually under great stress in Vancouver. Many of them are actually, challenged or having short lifespans because of the lack of access to water. When it rains, we quickly scoop it up, put it in pipes and send it to our receiving water. So we're really trying to change that and not only ensure healthy people, but healthy natural systems. Next. We also have some pretty significant challenges that will be exacerbated by climate change in terms of water quality. Vancouver, like many older cities, we have combined sewer systems. And so that means that when we have increased rainfall, we're also putting our water quality at risk, from increased discharge, stormwater pollution, and combined sewers. Next. So I think it's come up a few times here, but for Vancouver, this is becoming an increasingly critical issue for us to grapple with and thinking about equity and how do we support reconciliation within our communities. Over time, I think we haven't always looked at who's benefiting and who's burdened by some of the decisions that we make, either in terms of community plans, our natural systems, or how we make our investments. And so there's really an amazing opportunity here to challenge ourselves to think differently and to build new pathways that help reduce vulnerabilities, help systemic discrimination that's happening in all kinds of forms related to community plans and infrastructure, and think about how we benefit communities and provide new opportunities. Next. So when we think about green infrastructure in Vancouver, we're definitely thinking beyond just services and beyond just natural systems. We're actually thinking about how it supports really cost-effective decision-making, value for money investments, and job creation. There's a whole lot of opportunity here to create local, accessible green jobs and to help improve the communities that we live in through green infrastructure systems. Next. So the strategy. So Rain City Strategy is a high-level plan that's really starting to change the ship and the direction of the ship in Vancouver. We have 9 transformative directions, and at the core, we're really trying to strive to become a more water-sensitive city that's thinking about water in all aspects to help protect, restore, and mimic natural systems. Of course, taking that high-level vision into like a practical implementation plan that people can put to work is 3 action plans for streets and public spaces, buildings and sites, and parks and beaches. Next. So I think in the beginning of our process, we were very much focused on rainwater, but we quickly realized that the traditional approach of thinking about our different water resources separately was actually preventing us from really taking advantage of a lot of opportunities and leveraging what natural-based systems have to offer. Next. So we're really shifting now and recognizing the value of more holistic and integrated approaches to water management. And this is really a sweet spot for nature-based solutions where a single decision, a single investment, a single design approach can actually support multiple objectives. Next. And so our opportunity now, and where we're really focusing a lot of our effort, is on thinking about how we integrate green infrastructure into all aspects of our community and infrastructure planning. And we've had a very, very positive reception from across different departments, across sectors, and across community groups about trying to elevate the role of green infrastructure to meet all kinds of city objectives. Next. So the opportunity, I guess I'd like to really highlight for other jurisdictions that may be thinking about this is thinking about how we integrate green infrastructure and water management. For most cities, infrastructure related to water is one of the largest costs a city has. For Vancouver, it's one of the single largest annual expenditures that we make on capital projects and maintaining and caring for these systems over time. We have to spend the money to manage water in our cities. Why not spend that money on natural systems that yield so many benefits? So for Vancouver, when we design a lot of our green infrastructure, we're thinking about how do we reduce the volume of rainwater entering our pipe system that supports climate resiliency and supports wear and tear on the system, as well as thinking about how it improves water quality and many co-benefits. I'll give you a few examples of our projects. And as noted by the mayor previously, we're really ambitious about trying to ramp up our efforts and increase the delivery of services. We've got a plan in place for our first 4 years of Rain City Strategy to increase our infrastructure by 70% in our streets and public spaces. And we are managing millions and millions of rainwater runoff every year, cleaning it and keeping it out of the pipe system, allowing it to go back into the earth and be evaporated into the air. So it takes many, many forms in Vancouver. Some are small, some are larger scale. This is a beautiful picture of an underutilized boulevard in a neighborhood, and there was an adjacent development happening, and now it's managing 2.2 million liters of water. Next. This is a downtown arterial street integrated with a bike route. Next. This is in the heart of Vancouver's downtown, where we're adding 104 new trees in a high urban heat area and managing rainwater and keeping it out of our pipe system. And of course, we're trying to offset major gray infrastructure investments. And this is just one example of how we're integrating as a core part of our service plan delivery. And finally, there's a picture of Vancouver City Hall and our blue-green roof demonstration project that's helping lead the way managing very high volumes of rainfall on private property in dense areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melina. This has been a session just jam-packed with ideas, and I've certainly got a ton of questions to ask, but I realize that we just have 9 minutes left in this session, and I know that our audience is full of questions as well. So Jane, if I might, I'm going to turn it back to you to move directly to the questions from the audience in the time we have remaining to us. And thanks very much for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Fantastic presentations, and really you're doing so many inspiring and interesting things. That was great. I do have a specific question right off the bat for Danica. Thank you for the great talk. I fully agree that as researchers, we need to prove and show how nature-based solutions can work, and you're doing a great job at that. My question is, how do you manage to bring this up at a political level to convince municipalities to apply your recipes at a larger scale? Thank you.
So thank you very much for that question. I think it really comes down to listening and also collaborating and sharing, and also making sure that the stories get out about the work that people are doing in this sphere. So I think it's about conversations. More people have become more aware of the work that we're doing and our colleagues are doing because of simple conversations that may happen at a conference reception or at a council meeting. So I think by having conversations and having local solutions showcased in some case studies is a way to move forward.
Thanks. Sarah, given your group's focus on communication and the reach that you've got and the different types of approaches that youth are taking, do you want to comment on how to successfully move this topic at a political level and convince people that it's an important piece?
Yeah, definitely. So at the youth level, we're really about creating community and collaborating. So what we found successful at Youth for Nature is having a whole campaign centered around the differences, but also the similarities of impacts, and really having that robust knowledge system within our campaign to then bring up to higher levels, tables and political levels, to really reinforce the impacts that it can have.
Great, thank you. This one is for, I think, anyone, but maybe Stephen and Melina in particular. Can you talk a little bit about the important lessons learned regarding implementation and performance of nature-based solutions in your communities? Melina, why don't we start with you?
I would say the big lessons for us is you really need to try a lot of different strategies. For a lot of practitioners, it's a new way of doing business. And so there's quite a bit of like capacity building and learning. And I think leadership needs to give the space to allow that to happen. When we started planning the Rain City strategy, actually, we made a strategic decision early on. Let's actually start delivering more of these projects so that we gain experience and understand more of what we need. So that's been a really phenomenal experience. And I think in building partnerships to deliver the work, we are doing a lot of monitoring. For Vancouver, we're taking a performance-based approach. So we actually are expecting that our assets are going to be managing 48 millimeters of rainwater per day. So we're basically capturing that and cleaning it. So there's quite a bit of technical work that goes from it. And we are monitoring to see how well they're performing and then making adjustments as we go. And of course, the constructability are important, and getting feedback and having sort of good adaptive processes where we learn with each other and then improve our process over time.
Great, thank you so much. Stephen, anything you want to add to that about important lessons learned in terms of implementing these projects?
Well, I think at the scale with which Indigenous people are working on nature-based solutions is challenging. When we're talking about land and quantums of land the size of countries in Europe, politically challenging, especially when you're working with a population that's conditioned to value land only when it's when you find financial value in it, like gold, diamonds. And right across the country, I think that challenge is there. But the opportunity to create nature-based solutions at a scale that's needed globally to not only combat climate change, but for us to be able to adapt, I think the scale that Indigenous people can contribute is huge globally. In Canada, for example, the boreal forest region, it's 12% of the global biodiversity. And there's an opportunity where we could protect a big chunk of the boreal forests while creating economic opportunities and using Indigenous knowledge systems. Indigenous knowledge systems now we're finding can really contribute to science and can inform science. And I think globally, historically, science has been a Western construct. And that construct is not fulfilling the needs of Mother Earth. I think what some of the things we're working on here in Canada is what we're calling ethical space, where two knowledge systems can be put together and fit together, that results in two-eyed seeing, taking the best of both conventional science and Indigenous worldviews and understandings. I think that's what's needed. Is all nations of the world have a unique relationship with their parts of the world, with a unique understanding of the ecological environment. That's science that they understand. If we as a human species and society are going to accept science as the tool which we're going to use to mitigate climate change and other biological impacts, I think the global population needs to inform what that science is. And I think we're starting to do that here in Canada, and the opportunities are, I think is great for science to grow.
Thank you. The answer. We have time for one last one. I think a couple have come up along the same theme, so I'm just going to kind of mash them together and throw them out to you all. But it's basically, how good are we, or how have you approached making comparisons between gray and natural infrastructure solutions? And have you really been able to kind of prove the effectiveness of natural solutions compared to traditional infrastructure solutions? That it's open to anybody. Danica and Melina, you might want to comment.
I think this comes up a lot, honestly. There's sometimes a bit of a tension, actually. People feel like it's gray versus green. We definitely don't see it as gray versus green, but maybe like to think about it in terms of the green infrastructure actually delivers all kinds of services that gray infrastructure doesn't provide. So when we think about our pipe system, just discharging stormwater that's polluted from cars and runoff into our receiving waters, it's not receiving a water quality benefit. When we think about flooding issues, we want to hold water back and not send it at high speed in our pipe system down to our low-lying flood-prone areas that are going to be affected by sea level rise. So I feel like they're very complementary, and what we've learned from other jurisdictions and looking at how they've compared it, delivering your water infrastructure services to an integration of gray and green is significantly more cost effective than doing it through gray only, and it's more climate resilient and provides so many more benefits to the community, habitat and biodiversity, climate adaptation. So really there's like a value for money piece there that you try to deliver as much as you can through natural systems, green infrastructure, but it's really going to be a combination of tools.
Great, thank you. Any last thoughts there, Danica?
Yeah, I would speak to the combination of tools as well, and that's certainly how we're approaching dikeland management within the province of integrating. There are some places where a building up at that particular location is going to be needed, but there are other areas where there's opportunities where they can work in conjunction, cohorts. So one area might be moved back and built up while allowing that natural protective function. But I think it's definitely being open to all options on an equal footing and not necessarily prioritizing one over the other and saying that one is better or worse than the other.
Great. Thank you so much. Great. Niall, I'll throw it back to you because I think we're almost out of time for any final comments and wrap up. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane, and thanks to all our panelists here today. Just a phenomenal discussion, certainly an area where the Government of Canada continues to be excited to work with our partners across the country, and one where we hope that the lessons we're learning here in Canada and the kind of partnerships we're forging with Indigenous leadership and others will be of service to the world. So thanks again very much for the opportunity to be here with you all today, and I wish you the best for the rest of this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, panelists, and thank you, Niall, for that great discussion. Really appreciate everybody's thoughts and perspectives and all your experiences in this space. We're going to move straight into our third and final session today, which is approaches for financing and scaling up nature-based solutions for adaptation. This session is going to be chaired by Patricia Fuller, Canada's Ambassador for Climate Change. Ambassador Fuller represents Canada on behalf of Minister Wilkinson in the Global Commission on Adaptation and is co-leading the Nature-Based Solutions Action Track with Mexico. She is a passionate advocate for international cooperation on climate change across multiple platforms, and I'm delighted to introduce her here as our chair today. Ambassador Fuller, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jane, and you're doing a great job of keeping us moving. What a great discussion so far. I'm joining you from Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and I'm thrilled with the discussion so far. I think we're really achieving our objectives of illustrating for the world what Canada has accomplished so far with respect to nature-based solutions, and also just underlining the huge potential that we have to expand these solutions further. Donc, c'est certain, il faut qu'on fasse davantage pour renforcer ces solutions qui sont fondées dans la nature. Et c'est de plus en plus évident qu'ils ont des grands avantages. When we did our poll, we saw that funding was a key factor that is needed to expand nature-based solutions farther. So that is the focus of this panel. How can we increase the amount of financing for nature-based solutions? And how can we better understand the economic value of nature-based solutions? How can we build the business case and develop innovative approaches for financing nature-based solutions? And well, certainly the public sector has a very important role to play in financing and designing solutions and funding them. We must also mobilize greater private sector investment. We heard in the first panel from the insurance industry, who is already a leader in this area. And now in this panel, we're going to delve further into this area of financing. So I'm very pleased to be joined by 4 distinguished panelists. And I will introduce each of the panelists, and then we'll invite them to share their reflections, and we'll have a short discussion afterwards. And I do encourage the audience to continue to submit questions through the Zoom Q&A function, so that after the panelists' presentations, we can take your questions. Notre premier panéliste est Martin Baudouin-Nadeau. Martin is the founder and CEO of Viridis Terra International, which is a Canadian company that offers governments, the private sector, and civil society sustainable solutions for the restoration of deforested and degraded lands. Our second panelist will be Dr. Paige Olmsted. Dr. Olmsted is a senior researcher at the Smart Prosperity Institute, and she leads an initiative on conservation finance. Our third panelist is Tom Sofik. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, which focuses on habitat conservation in the agricultural landscape. And our fourth panelist is Roy Brook. Roy is the Executive Director of the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, which helps give municipalities the tools they need to identify and account for natural assets. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. And Martin, I'd like to start by inviting you to share your reflections on how the private sector is developing economically viable business models for investing in nature-based solutions. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It's a pleasure to be at this panel today. I'm the founder and CEO at Viridis Terra. We are a green tech company that specializes in the restoration of
natural capital. We have developed a new business model for large-scale forest landscape restoration activities that include the restoration of natural ecosystem, but also productive ecosystem that can generate revenues to the project that we are implementing at the watershed level. The advantage that we have when we restore natural capital is that we can produce different goods and services that are valuable on the market, such as timber, agri-food products, medicinal products, non-timber forest products, but also a lot of ecological services, such as the protection of water sources that other analysts today have discussed. Many countries in the world have big problem of water during drought season and everything. So restoring the natural capital can help protect these water sources. But also the carbon and the biodiversity offset market is developing quickly in the world right now. It brings also other opportunities to generate revenues for the project. When we look at nature-based solution, for us, it's not only about adaptation, it's also about mitigation. And one way we can create an economy around restoring these lands is that we integrate nature-based solution with other industrial sectors, such as infrastructure sectors, the construction and infrastructure, or extractive sector, which include mining and oil and gas industries, energy, or the agricultural sector. It's important to remember that these sectors, not only they are affected by the climate crisis, by the extreme climatic condition that we have, flooding, droughts, bigger storms and everything, but they also they are contributors to the climate crisis because they emit a lot of greenhouse gases. And by integrating a nature-based solution into their project, which is would cost less than 1% of the whole investment they do in a project, or even the revenues that they generate with this project, you know, they are able not only to build resilience at the landscape level, protect their infrastructure, but it can also help them become carbon neutral, to offset some of their emission that they are not able to do right now because the technology is not there yet in the industry they are working in. And also it can help to offset for all the biodiversity loss. So with that nature-based solution aspect into the project, these projects become has a positive impact on all levels. So it becomes easier to get and obtain the social license to get this project going. And at the same time, we can increase adaptation and resilience of the landscape against climate change. So this is something very important to keep in mind. So to be able to develop this sector more, we need to have support from the government to showcase this new business model that the private sector is bringing to be able to scale up. So a good example is the Sustainable Technology Development Canada program. We could have something similar with the nature-based solution that could help showcase this project, and then after that, the private sector, institutional investor can start to invest in the project and scale it at very large scale just with private sector money. So this is something very important to consider. That would be great to have a nature-based solution champion or a czar at the government level that will work with different ministry, also at the intergovernmental side of the government, to ensure we can integrate this nature-based solution into the different industrial sectors that could benefit from it. And also, and when we look at these industrial sectors, you know, investing in nature-based solution, it's not a cost, because over time, because you generate goods and services, you can get your principal back and even interest into this project. And for example, right now, Vega is launching in early 2021 a new investment vehicle where individual, corporation, or institutional investor will be able to invest in this project, get a return on investment, and offset carbon and biodiversity, carbon emission and biodiversity loss by investing into the restoration of natural capital. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. So again, we hear the importance of showcasing examples to illustrate the power of nature-based solutions, and I like your idea of a nature-based solutions champion. Okay, now we're going to go to Dr. Olmsted. Please, Dr. Olmsted, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to speak specifically to some policy opportunities that may present themselves to channel more private finance and public finance to nature-based solutions for climate adaptation. So I'll start with the public funding opportunities and give a couple of examples there. The first are financial incentives for capacity building and overcoming added cost of nature-based solution approaches. Adaptation planning, for example, in a vulnerable coastal region is already complex without considering nature-based solutions. And as we know, ecosystems and watersheds do not abide by political boundaries. Nature-based solutions inherently pose jurisdictional and management challenges, along with consideration of how to collaborate effectively. And so while we need to scale funding overall from the public purse, scaling existing programs or creating new ones are certainly a path forward, but without further financial support for capacity building, bringing new skills, incentives, or tools that facilitate collaboration, likely reduces the possible overall pool of nature-based solution projects significantly. The next point has come up in a few different ways this morning as well, which is accounting for co-benefits. If you think about a flood mitigation project, natural infrastructure like a wetland restoration delivers the targeted action as well as co-benefits like recreational opportunities and associated mental health benefits, but of course also habitat for biodiversity, nutrient management. There's tremendous added value that's rarely accounted for. We heard the Pelle's Lake example and the tool that IISD has in particular for accounting for co-benefits. But in general, if we could mandate the inclusion and valuation of those co-benefits, it could raise the profile of nature-based solutions when compared to gray infrastructure or engineered adaptation strategies. Similar to the earlier example, when we measure and monitor these benefits, on the one hand, it can add cost. But without consideration of these costs or otherwise incentivizing that data collection and sharing, it largely doesn't happen. And so it puts nature-based solutions at a disadvantage. I expect Roy Brook on this panel will go into a bit more detail on how policies that allow natural assets to be considered on par with engineering assets can further this aim as well. From the private investment standpoint, there's a real opportunity with new markets for ecosystem services. As we know, there's the federal GHG offset system that's currently under development, which is expected to drive substantial private investment in nature-based solutions. It provides regulatory clarity and confidence to project developers that their investment will be worthwhile and a level of credibility and transparency to investors. And so while, of course, the federal system is mitigation focused, of course, those same projects will have varying levels of adaptation benefits. And you could imagine a coastal forest that is strategic habitat for north-moving species compared to an inland reforestation project where the offset potential may be the same, but the adaptation potential may be dramatically different. And so there's an opportunity for the adaptation community to consider public or even corporate policy incentives to integrate consideration of adaptation and resilience when evaluating and selecting offset projects. There's similar potential in biodiversity credit markets to emerge, and there could be adaptation considerations integrated from the outset as those types of markets grow in Canada. The last point I'll make on the private sector are revenue generating projects, where nature-based solutions can actually accrue cost savings, and that provides the potential to generate returns for an investor using financial instruments like bonds or revolving funds, or the example that Martin just gave in the previous example. So we don't have the time to get into a ton of details on those types of instruments. It's something that I specifically spend a lot of time working on. They're novel and therefore seen as a bit risky. So there's a lot of potential there for enabling policies that can include tax incentives to participants. The government can play the role of a guarantor, which means they sort of guarantee the investment, thus alleviating the risk of external actors. You can set them up so that they have differential rates of return. So depending on your risk profile, you can receive a different amount of return with less risk-averse actors receiving lower returns. And at the scale of the financial sector in general, we're seeing rules in the EU, such as labeling financial projects related to their sustainability, that is driving shifts towards more of these sustainable options. And we suspect more of these creative financial mechanisms that can relate to nature-based solutions. So overall, these examples are intended to point to policies that can raise the profile of nature-based solutions for adaptation, consider the metrics that underlie and account for specific benefits that they generate, and attract a broader range of actors. This can help create more investment, which can reduce transaction costs and create that sort of snowball effect of ultimately reducing barriers to entry. Canada prides itself on its natural heritage, but we can do a lot more and will need to do a lot more in order to meet targets that we've set. So to accelerate and scale action, we think, and this has been echoed by others, that there's room for more collaboration to identify sector-wide challenges, produce and develop more tools like the Savvy tool that IISD mentioned, examine further policy innovations leading to more investment for nature-based solutions for adaptation specifically and in general. At the Smart Prosperity Institute where I work, we're looking to advance collective efforts that include government, NGOs, Indigenous leaders, and funders. And so please do reach out if that's something you'd like to pursue with us. And I look forward to advancing the conversation today and in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olmsted. That's a very helpful tour of the types of models for increasing investment in nature-based solutions. We're now going to go to Tim Sofik of the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation. So Tim, over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that my organization works on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of Anishinaabeg, Cree, Ojibwe, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. In speaking to the business case for natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions at the provincial level, I want to focus on the rationale for investments that Manitoba has recently made. In the last 3 years, Manitoba has invested $204 million to establish endowment funds that will be a perpetual revenue source for natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions, really to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The focus is two-pronged. One, renaturalizing working landscapes in Manitoba, especially in our agricultural region. And two, conserving high-value and at-risk natural areas in that same landscape. Annual trust revenues from which my organization funds projects will be about $10 million. They will drive new activities and new delivery infrastructure on the landscape. And we hope will also lever new funds from other public sector and industry partners. By the way, Manitoba is big geographically, but tiny in terms of population. We have 1.3 million souls. If Manitoba's per capita contributions were scaled up to all of Canada, the aggregate Canadian investment would be $5.6 billion. And I bring that up really to underscore the budgetary significance of this provincial investment for a small jurisdiction. Manitoba's climate policy has an emphasis on watersheds, soils, and working landscapes for a number of reasons, but transformative events in our history are worth highlighting. Manitoba's lived experience includes the 1930s Dust Bowl, a climate event that devastated the northern Great Plains and forced migration of many citizens because, well, there were no effective adaptation mechanisms in place. A flood in 1950 on the Red River displaced 1/3 of our capital city's citizens. That's over 100,000 souls, and it questioned the very economic viability of this province. Subsequent flooding in the last 3 decades shows us that built infrastructure alone will not get us the results we seek. Natural infrastructure and nature-based approaches are also required. Our 2017 Climate and Green Plan recognizes that large emitters are not a significant source in Manitoba. Transportation and agricultural landscapes are the most significant sources. The reality, and you add that to our provincial narrative, and it helps to drive Manitoba to prioritize landscape-based approaches to its climate response. Manitoba's trusts are built around achieving results in 4 outcome areas that are also indicators of adaptation to climate change. They include ameliorating the impacts of floods and droughts, surface water quality, carbon sequestration, especially in association with soil health improvements and alternate land use adaptations, and biological diversity and priority wildlife species. Given the multiple outcomes we seek, we recognize that approaches which deliver multiple benefits are preferred. We focus on supporting projects tied to watershed management plans and other landscape-based and species conservation plans. The key is a landscape focus and an emphasis on renaturalizing our working landscapes and, to the extent possible, delivering multiple environmental benefits that ultimately build resilience. Given that we work on private land, the payment for ecosystem services model is woven into project delivery. In cooperation with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, we're also building an evaluation framework designed to translate project outputs to progress towards trust outcome objectives. Our funding model provides revenue security, and it also builds delivery capacity for the long term. It's our hope that this model does prove attractive to other investors, including the federal government and industry. I look forward to exploring opportunities to use this base of trust funding for innovative approaches that lead us to greater resilience through nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I think based on what we've heard from others in the session so far about the importance of partnerships, it would appear that the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation is really a key way of creating those partnerships. So that's very interesting. Now we're going to go to Roy Brook, who's with the Municipal Natural Asset Initiative. Roy, please tell us about the MNAI very innovative approach to helping Canadian municipalities value and account for natural assets. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fuller. I'm joining you from the unceded Coast Salish territory of Lekwungen people. I will tell you in just a few minutes what natural asset management is, why it matters, what's happening in Canada, and then hopefully a few initial thoughts on how we can bring it to scale. I have two main points. First, natural features such as wetlands, forests, green spaces, and riparian areas are amongst our most valuable assets, and they are central to any resilient infrastructure system, particularly in a changing climate. Second, there's growing evidence in Canada that local governments can understand, value, and manage their natural assets as core infrastructure, and that this allows them to deliver vital services they would otherwise need to deliver via engineered assets, and deliver, as they do so, a variety of other valuable amenities. Two quick examples. One, wetlands and forests can absorb water, thereby reduce flooding, and this means local governments may not need as many, for example, retention ponds and culverts. Two, naturalized foreshores and coastal floodplains can protect against sea level rise and storm surges, so local governments may not need to build engineered dikes, walls, and berms. However, most local governments in Canada don't conceptualize natural assets as delivering vital services, or how much they depend on them, or really know what it might cost to replace those natural assets if they were to become degraded. To the extent that they're thinking about natural assets, they're thinking about them as recreational or social amenities. These are important, but leave a gap between the potential of natural assets and what local governments are doing about it. Why do we care? Well, our existing stock, engineered stock, is aging, it needs repair, it's under pressure from climate change, resources to keep building more and more engineered assets are in short supply, and the status quo is demonstrably not always delivering. So what we need are resilient, low carbon means to deliver service in a changing climate. And in many cases, these solutions are all around us. Valuable natural assets for which nothing has been paid and which can deliver services in perpetuity. So we need to recognize, understand, and act on that full value. The good news is that Canadian local governments are required to adopt modern asset management processes. These have as their core organizing principle the idea of sustainable service delivery. That means that the director of finance or engineering doesn't really need to care whether an engineered or natural asset is delivering the services, only if the service is reliable and cost effective. And there is growing evidence that asset management is a good approach to understand, value, and manage natural assets in ways that preserve their biodiversity, ecological integrity, and thus the services provided. And that is precisely what the Municipal Natural Assets Initiative, the NGO that I'm involved with, is helping local governments to do. So moving into some examples very quickly, the town of Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast was the first mover in the field that is now known as natural asset management. There's now 25 communities or more doing this, and the number is growing. The communities are finding several things. One, natural assets have high value. Two, they provide services that meet or exceed standards. Three, they provide a host of other benefits to people other than the local government. And four, they're resilient in the face of a changing climate. And as just one very simple example, the town of Gibsons compared two options to provide stormwater services to a new development. Culverts and trunk line was $4 million plus operating costs, and basically doing works in the forests to maintain them better was $800,000 in operating costs. And remember this, if you do not understand the services that nature provides, or you don't value those services, you're still putting a value on nature. That value just happens to be zero. So ultimately, we've got 25 local governments doing this. We need all local governments to be doing this. This requires market demand, multiple players to meet the demand, and an overarching set of norms and standards so that efforts are replicable, effective, and comparable. And we're involved in multiple efforts here. By this time next year, for example, BC will have the first professional standards for engineers anywhere on asset management with natural assets as an integrated component. I'll leave you with four quick thoughts for the audience on how to come to scale. There's 3,600 local governments in Canada. We're only a small part of the way there, and of course, this could be just as applicable in every other community. One, we need to find ways to protect natural assets before they are destroyed. Protecting them through whatever policy and governance structures is always going to be far better and cheaper than rehabilitating them later. Two, we need to make best use of existing funding. For example, in Canada, how can the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund make even better? How can it even better integrate natural assets? Three, any new infrastructure funding from any level of government in this country should have a requirement to at least analyze whether natural assets can deliver the desired service in whole or in part. And that analysis is key to the culture change that's needed. Finally, I would offer the following idea. Governments and major players can look at their own assets, their own natural assets more holistically. Parks Canada, as an example, could devise a way to manage its parks, the Rideau Canal system, the Trent Severn Waterway, to manage and optimize a whole range of services, not those relating strictly to parks and recreational. The same can be said for universities, school boards, ports, airports, and anyone else with large land holdings. Finally, there's a large normative piece that is important, but I don't really have time to go into that in detail, but can elaborate on that in the comments. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. And we do have, at the end of this session today, Minister McKenna providing closing remarks. So I'm sure she will have something to say about the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund that you mentioned. So now we have some time for a conversation among the panelists. And I think both Martin and Paige, you both mentioned carbon offsets and the potential role that they can play. Of course, carbon offsets are, as the name suggests, about carbon and about the mitigation side of the climate challenge. But could you comment on how offsets markets can be influenced to maximize the benefits for resilience. In other words, how can we make sure that as these markets develop, that the projects that are chosen are ones that have more benefits for carbon, more benefits for resilience. Martin, why don't you go first on that, and then Paige.
Sounds good. An example I will use is probably the province of Quebec. I don't know if you know, but 2 weeks ago, they announced their new green economy development program. They said they won't be able to reach their Paris Agreement goal for 2030. One thing with the carbon offset market, right now in Quebec, we don't have the offset protocol in place yet for forests, wetlands, reforestation, or stuff like that. If that would be in place, you know, the nature-based solution could play a very important role to help the government and the industries to reduce more quickly the overall emission of the province or the country. And by having these the carbon offset system in place, and that will allow to create to mobilize the private sector on these activities where big polluters could offset more than they are able to reduce right now using that carbon offset market in place. And I'm sure with that in place, it will the Quebec government or any other government will be able to be closer to their objective for the Paris Agreement by integrating both the polluting sector with the nature-based solution sector that could bring a lot of solution and increase also at the same time landscape resilience and adaptation to climate change. We need to remember that in Quebec last year in 2019, the flooding cost more than $2 billion. So you know, the nature-based solution could have reduced the cost of that flooding, you know, as a natural insurance. So, for example, where I live in Sainte Marie, the city, we lost the old downtown. 300 buildings are going down right now, and so by having this holistic approach that include a carbon offset market and biodiversity market well established at the provincial and national level, we could have huge impact on the sustainable development and fighting the climate crisis.
Thanks, Martin. So Paige, to you, how can we make sure that market privileges resiliency benefits?
Sure, I'll just add a couple quick points. One is that, you know, a regulated market, what that does is it provides confidence and certainty for would-be project developers that there's demand, that they're going to have a buyer at the end. So it's worth it for them to engage in those activities. And so where I think the challenge is on the resilience front is to, within those protocols and within that market, to ensure that there are incentives or parameters that ensure adaptation is considered, or that it is evaluated, so that a would-be buyer can evaluate those, and also the person producing the project says, wow, I could do something that's a bit simple here that really focuses on mitigation, or it's worth it for me to go the extra mile, to take the extra effort to deliver on this range of benefits. And the other point there, I think, comes from the demand side. There are a lot of corporate commitments, net zero commitments, that are driving a lot of the interest in buying up offsets. And I think we can push that on a couple of fronts. One is that why not go beyond net zero? You know, if we actually want to generate further changes, to push organizations to go further, but also to push them to say, you know, carbon mitigation alone is not enough. If you're considering your supply chain as a whole and your operations, yes, we want you to be changing practices to reduce environmental impact, but in terms of your commitments, adaptation should be a part of that, not just mitigation, and pushing from the consumer side as well.
Great, thank you, Paige. Tim, I'd like to ask you a question around what you've learned in the Manitoba Heritage Corporation in terms of building partnerships, because I think through this event, a number of people have said that what's really key to get nature-based solutions in place is bringing the right set of partners together. So from your experience, what's your kind of key piece of advice to other jurisdictions that are looking to scale up in this area?
I think, you know, on the money side, obviously you want to have friends in high places. I mean, what happened in Manitoba on the funding side actually came out of a new government at a senior political level, and there was a strong bias and commitment to achieving a long-term solution to the vexing problem of funding these kinds of activities. On the ground, I think what really matters is understanding who your client is and how you best not only respect them, but how you best reach them. And in our landscape, the focus on agriculture means conservation groups have a long history of trying to work around agriculture because we didn't know how to talk to agriculture. And the simplest approach is to go into those rooms and to begin the discussions. We had a challenge with the beef industry in Manitoba. It's a tremendous reservoir of habitat and conservation opportunity, but there was a sense that that there was just not, the conservation folks just weren't in it or didn't care about the beef industry. So I entered a meeting a few years ago and said, you know, how can we help you be more viable and how can we help you sell more beef? Because we want you on the landscape. So I think we just have to understand who the really important people are and what it takes to get them involved.
Great. And that's a very good reference to the agricultural sector, which we haven't talked a lot about in this event, but very important in the area of nature-based solutions. Roy, I'm just wondering, I know MNAI is a partner with the Insurance Bureau of Canada and Swiss Re in what Craig Stewart was talking about earlier in the event in terms of insurance models for municipalities to be able to protect natural assets and also to channel more resources into them. So I'd just like to get your perspective on this approach and what you're launching with the Insurance Bureau and how you see the prospects for getting municipalities engaged in these models of an insurance approach.
Sure, thank you, Ambassador. Well, maybe I'll make three quick comments. The first is that partly it's about funding. So that's funding from private or from public sector sources and getting that right. So that's one important piece of capitalizing natural asset rehabilitation and restoration. A second piece is financing. So here I'm speaking of finances from the capital markets. There's many moving pieces to this, but green bonds traditionally, only a very tiny fraction of any green bond money goes into what we would call natural assets and adaptation. There's lots of things that are needed to address that, but the wheels are slowly starting to move there. In respect of the Swiss Re thing in particular, the idea is this: you can have insurance that kicks in after a flood to repair buildings and lives that are damaged and destroyed. And that's obviously very important. You can have another type of insurance, possibly called parametric insurance, which would kick in when a threat of a certain threshold was met, say a flood above a certain level or a storm over a certain category. And instead of just fixing up houses and buildings, the money would automatically be pumped into supporting, repairing, rehabilitating natural assets where they have a demonstrated ability to reduce risk. There's only a couple of examples of this anywhere in the world. One's in Mexico in the Mesoamerican Reef, the other's in the Netherlands, slightly different examples. Together with Swiss Re and IBC, we're hoping to pilot something similar in Canada. MNAI's interest isn't in insurance as such, it's in seeing whether or not we can help local governments have access to more and better ways to ensure they've got a stock of healthy natural assets. So anybody who's interested in that project should drop me a line and I'll pop my email up on this.
Excellent. I think I did see interest in learning more about that that initiative in the chat and or the Q&A, I should say. So speaking of the Q&A, we're now going to go to questions from our audience. So Jane, could you please give us a question for the panel?
Yes, thanks. That's my cue. We've had tons of them, and you've touched on a lot of what people have raised so far, but I wanted to raise, there have been a couple of questions around benefits for biodiversity, and there was a question specifically for Martin. Could you give a concrete example of your work to give us a sense of the benefits for biodiversity?
Excellent. But our business model was developed for the tropics. Right now we have a project in Peru, in South America, and the way it works is that we sign contracts with the landholders at the watershed level. So where there's a lot of degraded land, degraded landscape, what happens is we bring the capital with impact investor that invest in our investment vehicle. It's about all the carbon offset and biodiversity offset generated by the project are owned by the investors. So they receive returns based on the deforestation-free commodities that are produced in the project at the landscape level. And they receive also their certificate for carbon offset credits and biodiversity offset credits. And usually we have a goal to restore about 30–35% natural ecosystem. So it's natural forests, wetlands, riverbanks. That's where we generate a lot of biodiversity. But at the same time, when all the productive restoration that we do, which are for commercial forest plantation and agroforestry system, is that we also include a biodiversity aspect in it, where we have diversified species of trees that are integrated in the system that always stay there, so they cannot be cut. They are there to keep the fertility in the ecosystem and also keep the resilience of the landscape with all the natural ecosystem that we restore. So that's where we generate a lot of biodiversity assets. And people that invest in the project have access to these biodiversity credits. So a company that wants to offset some of their biodiversity loss, they can invest in the investment vehicle, get a returns, and also have access to these biodiversity assets.
Thank you. Great. Very interesting. I've got one that's directly for Roy. So back to you, Roy. Thanks for your excellent comments on natural assets and what can be done to support their implementation more widely. Could you also comment on the need for standards to help support the management, maintenance, and monitoring of these assets and the level of service they provide?
Sure, I actually typed in a response, and no, I wish I had it in front of me. Standards are needed at many levels. We need standards for professions. And I cited the example of the work we're doing with engineers and geoscientists of BC. The same could be said for planners, landscape architectures, agrologists, and many others, but we are working there. Standards or norms at the level of public sector accounting is vital. When we've had quite a bit of engagement there. As some of you may know, the Public Sector Accounting Board Handbook does not allow natural assets to be considered tangible capital assets for accounting purposes. But it is not something that we should get tied up around the axle on. It's mostly a problem for financial reporting, but there's workarounds. It is absolutely not a problem for most aspects of financial management, but it is an issue. And if PSAB changed things, it would be a huge stick to sort of drive people into this area. We also need norms at the level of individual communities, so that if Toronto says, I'm quote unquote doing natural asset management, it actually means something, in the same way that if a building says, if we say a building is LEED certified, it has to mean something. And then the individual pieces of any methodology around this also need to be comparable and replicable. If someone says they've done a natural asset inventory in Gander, and that their assets are in quote unquote good condition, they need to mean more or less the same thing as someone in Dawson Creek. Otherwise, we're going to have a complete smorgasbord across the country, and that will help no one and would, in my view, be inimical to any efforts to have meaningful funding or financing or monitoring.
Right. Thank you very much. Tim, I'm going to throw another one to you that's touches on agriculture again. And it says, Tim, great to hear your work. Many productive landscapes are absolutely effective habitats. For example, silvopastures, intensive agroecological market gardens, well-managed pastures. So are there ideas how to support the co-use of land for food and nature rather than taking land away from food for nature?
It's a very good question. In fact, if anybody wants to go to the Conservation Trust portal, they can see what, the kinds of things we emphasize. And in fact, we're putting most of our dollars towards those kinds of activities. We want to see, nature-based solutions that work in the agricultural landscape, and for the most part, landowners must continue to make a living from those lands, and land set aside isn't always affordable from a conservation perspective and is not always the most optimal land use practice. Our remaining native pastures are functioning native prairie ecosystems, and they need to continue to be grazed. So we would focus on activities that would help that landowner to enhance their pasture system, which not only provides benefits for them from an economic viability standpoint, but it truly delivers biodiversity benefits. We're retaining water infiltration benefits, all those things that we want and can get working with and in an agricultural landscape.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to sneak one last one in. Paige, this is for you. There have been a couple of questions about green bonds. Can you speak to the lack of use of green bonds for financing natural asset projects? Obviously, increasingly being used across North America for other purposes. Is this something that your kind of the policy proposals you were speaking about would help to overcome?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Most green bonds look at transit, renewable energy, infrastructure projects, and have less focus on nature-based solutions because of some of the specific complexities that go with nature. It's a lot harder to measure rates of return, internalized rates of return over specific timeframes. There's a lot more uncertainty just when you're dealing with complex ecosystems in terms of variability. And so at the moment, since green bonds are modeled off traditional bonds, that they tend to follow similar models where those metrics are a lot easier to assess. If we had more widely collected metrics in a systematic way like Roy was discussing, it'd be a lot easier to imagine how a typical green bond could finance a nature-based type solution or natural infrastructure in particular. In terms of more creative strategies, there are a lot of financial, well, maybe not a lot, there are some financial mechanisms out there. One example are resilience bonds. There's in California, a forest resilience bond that a lot of people point to as an example. In Southern Ontario, there's actually, Carolinian Canada has created a conservation impact bond. And in all of these cases, the trick is by making some kind of investment where a restoration or conservation activity takes place, there are definite measurable ecosystem benefits, but it depends how that cost is captured in order to return it back to an investor. And usually you need some creative financial ways to make that work. And often the beneficiaries are diffuse and you need them to agree essentially to be involved in that payback structure. So I'll invite people to check out the Carolinian Canada bond or the Forest Resilience Bond in California that highlights that they're a lot more complex, they involve more partners, and they often involve an intermediary. And that is, a financial institution that is bringing those appropriate people together. And I guess as a final point, to enable that type of work in Canada, our enabling environment to develop some of those types of financial structures, is still relatively small. I saw some comments. I think there's some folks involved in that field that are in the audience today, so they may be reaching out. But yeah, for the moment, there are more creative financial structures that are necessary to address nature-based solutions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paige. Ambassador, I'm going to throw it back to you. I know we're sort of out of time for questions, so any final comments from you before we wrap this session up?
Thank you, Jane. I just want to thank our fantastic panel. You've really shed a light on some of the challenges, but also some of the huge opportunities in channeling more financing into nature-based solutions. So thank you to each and every one of you for the contribution today. Merci beaucoup.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ambassador, and all panels, and really everybody who is submitting such fantastic questions. They've been just wonderful today, so that really helps our conversations. And so I appreciate everybody online who's submitting such great thoughts. So we're going to move into some closing remarks here before we wrap up today. And first, I'm going to call on Ludmilla Amur, our youth rapporteur for the event. Ludmilla is a young Afro-Quebecois professional in the field of environmental policies. She's a policy analyst at Environment and Climate Change Canada right now on the Climate Change Adaptation team. So welcome, Ludmilla. I'll pass it over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Jane, pour cette petite présentation. Et je remercie aussi l'équipe d'Adaptation de me laisser quelques minutes pour revenir sur les présentations qu'on a eues. Donc, nous avons eu énormément d'informations, de connaissances. Je voudrais juste revenir sur les quelques mots qui m'ont marqué particulièrement. Je vais faire ma petite présentation dans les deux langues. Donc, pour la première partie, je voudrais premièrement remercier the Indigenous Elder Inuit pour la présentation du début. Je pense que c'est des mots qui m'ont particulièrement touchée car du côté de ma mère, on est aussi des Premières Nations dans mon pays d'origine. Donc, ce fut très important pour moi d'entendre ces mots essentiels. Ce que je retiens particulièrement des présentations, c'est tous les mots et les concepts de self-determination, local leadership, innovative ideas to adapt, natural system, blue, green, roof. Tout ça était vraiment, vraiment inspirant. Rempli d'espoir et bien évidemment, juste pour en nommer quelques-uns, merci à la ville de Vancouver, le CEO de Manitoba Initiative, le Youth for Nature, encore une fois les Premières Nations, Indigenous Communities et tout ce qui est les finances et le domaine des assurances. For my part, I think as a policy analyst, like those conferences and those ideas just made me realize how I should definitely include in all my tasks, in all my work, like every voices, and particularly like the BIPOC, like Black, Indigenous, and people of color, including like young people in every like decision or every like, you know, ideas or advice that I'm gonna give for my own job. And also to face just my own risk aversion and also to reduce like contradiction between what we so-called like easy habits, you know, business as usual, but also to versus like resilient behaviors. So I think natural-based solution is really a good idea and a good initiatives and a good topic to be in the right path, to reframe our relationship to nature, to be absolutely part of it. Because working together is the only solution that we have, living human being and living being and non-living. Just to build like strong communities, and to face this anxiety and doubts about changes, to actually be part of an enormous challenge, which is climate change, to be part of something that is just bigger than ourselves. So thank you very much for this hope and for those great ideas.
Thank you, Ludmilla, for those really thoughtful and really inspiring remarks. I appreciate you weighing in on your thoughts. Thanks so much. I'm now going to throw the microphone over to the Honourable Catherine McKenna, now Canada's Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, and before that, when I had the distinct honour of working for her, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. So she's very well positioned to bridge the topic of nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure. Welcome, Minister McKenna. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. And well, thanks, Ludmilla. We need young people, and it's great to see they're always leading the way and pushing, and they link issues. So they understand that when you talk about climate, you're also talking about inclusivity, Indigenous peoples. And really, that's why I care so much about this, about climate change, about adaptation, about nature-based solutions, because it's really about the future we want to leave our kids. Thanks very much to IISD and of course Jane. Jane, I miss you. You were really great. You were a great director of policy, but I'm glad to see that you and IISD are leading the way. on some really important discussion. So I might go back in time a little bit. I started, as Jane mentioned, as Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Alors c'est presque la 5e anniversaire de l'Accord de Paris. So pretty soon we'll be celebrating 12/12, which is the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. And I didn't really necessarily understand the complexities of the climate change file. And it actually took me a while to really get to the nature-based solutions place. And you might say, well, that's weird. But a lot of focus when you're in climate is on mitigating emissions by sector, but thinking about things like pricing. And of course, there's still a relationship there, and I can talk a bit about that, but these sectors, reducing emissions by sectors, and not as much of a link between climate and nature. But then we got to that eventually. I ended up hosting a nature leader summit in my last year, and it really kind of rounded the circle. And I think it's really, it's interesting because now I'm in this really great role where I get to make investments to build infrastructure. And I've been able to have people think differently, including in my department. They knew about it, but I don't know that we thought about it as much. And that's really about natural infrastructure. And we really need to change how we think about infrastructure. It's not just roads and bridges, which of course it is. It's not just renewable energy and public transit. It's also nature. And that's a great thing because it has so many, nature has so many different benefits. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we just had the fall economic statement by the first female finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. And in it, I mean, obviously huge focus was on the pandemic, but we also talked about an investment of $3 billion to plant 2 billion trees, which was about fighting climate change, adapting to the impacts of climate change, protecting forests, and of course, creating good jobs. And I think that that's really important, that we now understand how important it is that we look at nature-based solutions, and we link that to adapting to the impacts of climate change. So I'll talk a little bit about my portfolio. And I know Jane has told me to be short, that I have 4 minutes or something. I might go over 4 minutes, so sorry, but I won't go a lot longer because I have another event. But when you think about what Infrastructure Canada is doing, I mean, first of all, we have a program. It's called Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. I know there's been interest. I've heard people have spoken about it today, so that's good. It's a $2 billion fund, completely oversubscribed. And this fund was designed to help support the impacts of climate change, to take action to support it, which include nature-based solutions. So when you think about it, it's about climate resilience for sure. It's about improved water management. It's about biodiversity. It's about jobs, and it's about providing a better quality of life for Canadians. And if you want to know how I think about the world, I only do things in threes. That's all I do. I can only count to 3. Maybe I've got 3 kids. So when I think about action, when I think about investments, including nature-based solutions, they have to do 3 things. One, they need to create jobs. That we know we need jobs. We're in a pandemic, and nature-based solutions can create jobs not only in urban areas where when you use nature-based solution, to adapt to climate change, but also in rural areas. And we need jobs in rural areas, also for Indigenous peoples who are on the land. So I think that's incredibly important, jobs and also economic growth. And I don't have to tell you numbers. I'm sure you've heard all of the stats about the impacts of climate change and the costs that we're paying right now. So it started at 400, I think 10 years ago, it was at 400 million, and we're now over $1 billion in insured costs, and it's obviously a lot more than that. So making investments in nature-based solutions to adapt to climate change just makes economic sense. Second thing is on the climate front, nature-based solutions, they can act as sinks. That's incredibly important. Of course, they're talking about adapting, so that it's important, but there's other ecosystem benefits. Biodiversity, for example. So that is a huge opportunity. And then the third thing is inclusivity. So jobs and economic growth, climate, nature, climate, environment. And the third thing is inclusivity. And I think that's also really important. When you think about nature-based solutions, I think we really need to be linking that to opportunities for folks, including Indigenous peoples, or maybe especially Indigenous peoples, who want to be part of the solution and who are a lot closer and to the land than many of us, and who live on the land. Alors, je pense que c'est une très grande opportunité de travailler ensemble. Another program that we have, we've adapted our infrastructure program to allow for a COVID-19 resilience stream. That would also allow for investments in nature-based solutions. So that would be resilience, so in nature-based solutions to adapt to the impact of climate change, but also nature as something allowing people to get out to nature. So when you think of different examples, I think about the Toronto Ravine Strategy. So John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, has talked to me a lot about this. This strategy would be good to adapt to the impacts of climate change, because we're talking about ravines that where there's been erosion, there's been other impacts, but it's also good for people. People can get out to nature, and we know how important that is right now. A lot of people just live in high rises, so allowing them to get out to nature and creating good jobs right now. And I also am looking at, to anyone that is, at the Department of Finance, or thinking about what other investments we could be making. As we think about the future, I think we really need to think more about natural infrastructure. Just more broadly, it's a huge opportunity, and I think that there are real reasons to do this. And whether it's thinking about communities in the Bay of Fundy that are at risk of flooding and coastal erosion, and we've invested there in improving salt marshes, or in York Region, we've invested money to plant over 400,000 trees. There's a huge opportunity there. And I haven't really gone into details about how that this could be an opportunity to link to carbon pricing or credits or green bonds. But I know you've had a great discussion. I just want to say that this is a top priority for the Government of Canada, and I think it's a top priority. You had our ambassador, Patricia Fuller. It's a top priority for Canada to bring this message to the world and work with partners in developing countries. That we all need to be working together. We all are in this together, and we need to be figuring out solutions and sharing best practices. So that's something I'm also committed to doing. But just thanks, everyone. I know this was a great conference on a really, really important topic that's really close to my heart personally, but I know is just so critical as we think about how we're going to adapt to the impacts of climate change, and also how we're going to fight climate change.
Thank you so much, Minister McKenna. Great to hear from you today. Great to hear about all the innovations across the federal government that we've been talking about today, but also the provincial and municipal levels, where we've heard about some really forward-thinking projects that are happening across this country. Really interesting to hear about all the innovation and partnerships needed to advance nature-based solutions for adaptation. It's been a really inspiring session this morning. So glad you could join us. I'm sure you'll be hearing more from us on all the outcomes of this conversation and all the recommendations that have come forward. So we'll be looking to you to follow up. And just fantastic to hear someone in your position now expressing this much interest and enthusiasm in moving this file forward. So thanks again for joining us today.
Great, thanks. Bye, everyone. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Well, that marks the end of our agenda today. So I really want to thank all of you for participating today. And again, a huge thank you to the chairs and all of our panelists for sharing all of your expertise today. For those of you who want to follow up for more detail, you'll be able to reach out and connect to those panelists. What's really important, I think, in terms of being able to keep this topic top of mind in government offices and private sector offices, not just across Canada, but around the world, are the collaborations and partnerships that we form through conversations like this. So please do continue to reach out. We'll be posting the recording of this event on our IISD site this week. And of course, there'll be more events around nature-based solutions leading up to the Climate Adaptation Summit end of January. So keep a lookout for those too. That's it for us and for our program today. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful week.